Good morning, everyone. Has everyone got a cup of coffee? Bit of water? All right, so welcome to our second ILUS annual shareholders meeting. My name is JP Backwell. I'm Managing Director at ILUS, and I'm joined by quite a few team members this year. If you recall, last year, there was 3 of us or 4 of us out. And so I think I'll just introduce you to everyone who's with us. Not everyone will be doing presentations, but some will. So obviously start off with Nick, our CEO. So you guys all know Nick. And Carsten, our Chief Commercial Officer. We'll talk a bit later when we talk about all the compliance things that we deal with. And obviously you'll see we've done a fair bit last year. So Carsten has been one of the men behind that. He's done a huge amount of hard work. I don't think the guy ever sleeps. So he's an important member of our team. And at the back there, we've got Dan Peters, CEO of ERT. You guys might have seen a few photos of him. Formerly ran an $800 million company. So we are grateful to have his experience on board, and he'll be doing a bit of a presentation later. We've got Tim Gray and Chris Derbyshire from Hyperion Defence Solutions. They live in the UAE, but they are both British, both former military or military vets. You can't be a former military vet, but got to get that right. And they've got a presentation for us later, so looking forward to that too. We've got Jason Whitby, General Manager at Georgia Fire. Great business that, done a great job last year. And then Brett Grove, General Manager at Bullhead Products. Thanks, Brett. Also really a standout performer for us last year in terms of their growth since Brett joined us. So we'll get a bit into all of the different business details later. So let's take a quick look at today's agenda. So obviously introduction. We're going to talk a bit about 2022, just reflect a little bit on how things went for us in 2022. We're going to look at 2023. We'll talk a little bit about forecasts and growth plans. We'll talk about ERT, the various businesses, what we've done, what we're doing, our focus areas. QIND, you'll have seen that we signed the share purchase agreement to acquire Quality International, 52% of Quality International. So I've got a presentation on that and QIND in general. Huge plans for QIND this year. So very exciting developments going on there. And yeah, so really looking forward to talking to you about that. Nick's going to do a presentation on Replay Solutions, just a short piece on that. There's also some big moves being made there. And then our defense subsidiary, which we've spoken about many times, we're taking a big leap forward there with Hyperion Defence. And there's obviously things going on within, under their umbrella. So that's going to be a good presentation, I said. Then we'll break for lunch, and then we've got a number of things to speak about thereafter. So I think, some good pieces coming after lunch too, towards the back end. And then we've got a number of your questions. I think I got in around about 200 emails with questions, some with, 10 to 15 questions in each email. What I've done is I've formulated, for example, there's questions on Vera drones, right? We must have got 50 questions on Vera drones. So we'll answer it. We'll talk about that. Serbia, we'll talk about that. Actually, I'll cover it during my presentation. So a lot of bits and pieces, share buyback, lockups, lots of different things, some of which we answer and we talk about in the course of the presentation today. And then obviously whatever we don't is in the back end in that Q&A. So hopefully most, if not all of your various questions will be answered. And I think at that point, I would also just add, we did become, in fact, I'll jump across to this introduction slide, but a lot of the information, there was a lot of questions that we received where the answers were in our Form 10. And I don't think necessarily, I think a lot of people here in this room will have spent some time going through our Form 10 that we submitted. But there was still a lot of questions that we received where the answers all sit in our Form 10. And, for me, I think it's important, I think more so for the people listening and for you, Rich, on the Discord and things like that, to point people towards the Form 10, because we really opened up the door to our business. And what I feel is a lot of people have stood in the garden and looked into the house and said, well, tell us what you're doing in bedroom number 4. Tell us what upgrades you've made in bedroom number 4, as opposed to actually walking in and taking a looking around for themselves. And all that information is in the Form 10. We've been very transparent with that. And now that we're a fully reporting company, all of our material information, any material change we make in the business will be filed in our 8Ks. So just bear that in mind, right? But we'll cover a lot of that in the presentation. So I've put this slide in. I know it's very much a similar slide potentially to what you would have seen at last year's shareholders meeting. For me, it's important because we've really broadened our scope as a company, and I wanted to obviously just show that to you. So yes, we're a public mergers and acquisitions company as ILUS itself. We now have a number of companies in our group, and where we've broadened our scope is in the second piece. We're focused on acquiring and growing public safety, defense, industrial, oil and gas, and renewable sector companies, and adding shareholder value as a result of how we grow our businesses. So that's our focus. Now, if you recall back to our last shareholders meeting, very focused on public safety, and we were in the initial stages of talking about all these other subsidiaries. Where we've made huge progress is on that subsidiary front, as well as in the public safety front too. And that's really what we're going to be getting into today. So let's have a look at a quick throwback to 2022. It seems a while since the year ended. We grew substantially in 2022. And for me, the fact that we grew approximately 450% in revenue over the previous year is huge testament to that growth and the actual business that we're building. So we spent a lot of time, we talk about this a lot, we've really spent a lot of time laying solid foundations in the various businesses, and that'll be reflected when Dan speaks and things like that. But for me, there's not many companies that are 2 years old that have delivered that sort of growth. So for me, I'm very pleased with that performance. I think as a board, as the ILUS board, we're very pleased with what we accomplished. And we're still a very young company. So in many areas in the different businesses, there's a lot that we're still working on. There's a lot of improvements we need to make on the public safety aspect. We haven't achieved all of our goals that we wanted to, for example, in 2022. So it's not all rosy for us. That's not the picture we're trying to paint. But we have grown substantially, and we've laid some very, very solid foundations. We are supremely confident in terms of where we're going, and I think that will become quite clear later on in the various presentations. But a huge accomplishment from our part was getting the 2020 specifically, because obviously we took over from previous management at the end of 2020, really got going beginning of 2021. So getting the 2020 and 2021 audits completed successfully, getting our Form 10 filed and becoming fully SEC reporting was a huge accomplishment for us last year. So that's a big box ticked. And then, as I said, penny stock exempt status too. I'm not sure if everyone necessarily realizes this, but there's 8 companies now across the group. I say 8 as of the end of last year. Right now we're 11 in the group, and we just had an agreement signed this morning. So things are changing so fast. We were preparing for this meeting, finishing up the presentation, and another deal is signed. So that's how things move. Some things take longer, some things take quicker, and it's pretty dynamic because we're working on so many different things. We've obviously, through the acquisition of Quality International, brought a huge amount of manufacturing facilities and synergies into the business. We'll get a bit into that. And obviously, we have a number of employees in the group. So really, I think the growth across the board has been pretty significant. And we'll reflect a bit more back within the various businesses later on. So this is a slide, and I've put this in specifically. This is a slide from last year's presentation. All right. So it's literally the exact slide. I've not changed a thing from it. This is the picture we painted at the beginning of 2022, following 2021. So call it our 2021 meeting, right? And we were focused on, at that stage, having a number of subsidiaries within our group: emergency response, integrated systems, renewables, and then autonomous tech. That picture's changed a bit, but if you just look to the right there, the focus more or less has remained the same, with ILUS being the parent company owning a majority stake of its subsidiary. And where we adapted slightly or pivoted slightly is we've moved to this approach. Still with our emergency response subsidiary, that really is our passion. That's why we got into this game, as I always say. But our industrial subsidiary, industrial oil and gas utilities in Quality Industrial Corp, we acquired Wikisoft, changed their name to Quality Industrial Corp. And so they were the special purpose vehicle for us to accomplish the goals, the various acquisitions in that specific subsidiary. We obviously have the renewable subsidiary and we have the defense subsidiary. We'll come to Hyperion in more detail later, of course, but you can see there that we have SPVs for each of the 4 subsidiaries. Again, when it comes to emergency response, let me just clarify that that is part of our plan. However, that could change. It's not 100% set in stone. With the other 3, the plans very much are to put the defense and the renewables business into SPVs and operate that way. And that allows us to accomplish more acquisitions, which are very much lined up for each of these subsidiaries. So that's the structure we're looking to push forward. We already are very much pushing forward with in 2023 and beyond. Again, it's not to say that there might be little tweaks and changes here and there, but hopefully this paints a clear picture for what we're looking to achieve. Now, if you look towards the bottom, you'll see that there's various things that have been achieved and various things that we're targeting. So I'll jump to this next slide and just give you a status update, really, in terms of where we're at and what we're working on. So, as I said, 8 companies in the group. However, a deal now signed on the QI&D side. So we're constantly adding and we're working on a number of things. And I know it's always challenging because when you're doing acquisitions, there's so much that comes into the fray from a due diligence perspective. You can get right to the final hurdle and find some discrepancies that really turn you off in terms of a business. And that has happened to us many times. We're fairly confident that with what we have here, it's our plan has really, we've really started to really see exactly where we want to go in terms of each subsidiary. So the businesses we are in negotiation with at the moment all had huge value in specific areas, whether it's on the ERT side, vehicles, manufacturing capability in the US, wildfire technology, on the quality industrial side, adding more utility type technology, refineries, things like that. So very exciting. But if I just have a look, obviously we've got the completed deals, many of which you'll know of, again, in the Form 10, with the exception of Hyperion Defense, and that's obviously something that we will add. I'll come to the 2023 forecast for the business shortly. We've got some deals that are at letter of intent stage, and as I said, that's quite dynamic because we're expecting some things to close, some things could take longer, and things like that. We have deals which are in negotiation, and it's just an idea of where those are. And there's deals that we are discussing. We're looking at various ways that deals could become possible with the respective parties. And if you look at those numbers there, that's how we, for example, sometimes, as if it's from my personal perspective, I can often see that we can become $1 billion company, but in as little as a year. Is that certainly something that is going to happen? It's tough to say, because it's such a dynamic situation when you're working on these deals. However, you can see that there's a lot going on in terms of numbers and a lot that we're working on. So hopefully that picture is clear for you. We've added some great companies to our group. And we'll get into things, the businesses, some smaller like Shareholder Safety, a strategic acquisition, very, very strategic acquisition. We'll cover a bit about that. Obviously, Quality International, huge accomplishment for us as a business. A deal that size, bringing them into our fold. We've got big plans for them as a company and similar businesses to be added. And then on the defense side, it's always been very important to us to add that defense, because that defense aspect to the business, it links very closely to our public safety side. So protection of the warfighter, protecting communities, that whole picture. For me, public safety and defense is hugely, hugely important. So I'm pleased to see that we are actually making significant progress on that front now. All right, so jumping into 2023, we have a very conservative forecast, in my view, of 200 million for the year. When you see the quality industrial picture later, you'll think, well, sure, your forecast is certainly quite conservative. The reason we're putting that out is because we're really looking at focusing on the pieces below this year in the business. And as a result, I think we will far exceed that revenue. But it's more about increasing the profitability within ERT, for example. And there's lots of other foundational things that we're working on. So Yes, in terms of milestones, we have subsidiary uplist plans, and we'll come to that later. We have the goal of expanding our renewables and defense subsidiaries. But what is hugely important for us as a business, and arguably for me, even more important, is getting the firefighting vehicle and equipment manufacturing properly underway in the US by the end of this year, and on a fairly significant scale. So some of that is tied into acquisitions, and some of it is tied into just hard and smart work that we need to be doing as a business. And so that is hugely important for us. And I know that everyone, well, not everyone, but a majority of people will reflect on the numbers in terms of what we're forecasting. As I said, we can far exceed those. But for us, it's very important to get certain things moving forward in the business in a strong fashion. And the firefighting vehicle and equipment manufacturing side here in the US is very important to us this year. The certification of our fixed firefighting systems, we've made some progress. We'll talk a little bit about that, but that's hugely important this year for us too. And then a huge challenge for us has been hiring of senior people across the board in our various businesses. We'll cover a bit more about that later, but there's some key people that we're looking to bring on into the company very soon, imminently, if I can use that word. But throughout the course of this year, we've got a clear plan in terms of the positions we're wanting to hire for, and that's a huge challenge for us because the people in this room are really what contributes, and an exception of people like Louise and Murti back in Dubai. Really, there's a few people that really carry this business, and we need some more hands on deck, some very, very experienced hands on deck that can take us where we need to go. And as that picture becomes more clear in terms of where we're going, you'll understand that certainly Nick and myself and Carsten and the likes of the other people in this room are, we can't do it alone. So we've got to bring more skill on board. When I say completion of 10 acquisitions, that might be worded slightly incorrectly. We have a number of acquisitions in the group. I would certainly expect that we would be doing 5 or more acquisitions this year. That's more a goal from my side, but the point there is we're looking to add a lot more technology and capability into the group. That's the main point. Hugely important is the second to last point. Operational efficiency is, it's not necessarily something that shareholders would talk about, but for us, under the hood in the various businesses, we need integration, we need visibility. If Nick is sitting in Hong Kong and I'm sitting in the US and he's asking me what's going on in this business, he needs to be able to know straight away. I need to be able to know straight away what's going on at Bullhead, what's going on at Georgia, what's going on at Quality International, a massive company. And that NetSuite ERP integration is hugely important. So that's a big goal for us this year. And then, of course, the consolidation of the acquisitions. I mean, you guys can chat to Jason and Brett later. They can still tell you about areas where we're consolidating and working on structural things within the businesses. It's an ongoing challenge for us. So that's hugely important, and things, a number of things like that we want to get under wraps. So just a graphical illustration in terms of our growth forecast for the next 3 years. You've got our organic growth, so that's our current businesses in the group, and then we expect, we're fairly confident that we could reach or exceed $1 billion in revenue by 2025. Is it possible sooner? For sure, it is. But that's the growth forecast. And that brings me to the first of the 4 subsidiaries that we'll be covering today, Emergency Response Technologies. I'm going to talk a bit about the various businesses and just give you a little bit of an update in terms of where we're at with them. And then I'm going to bring Dan up. Well, hopefully Dan will come up, and he's got a couple of slides that he wants to talk through, and so to speak to you more about the North American markets and some of the plans that he has in that response in that area. So ERT, just a reminder for those who don't know, it is also a mergers and acquisitions company focused on the area of public safety. Key thing for us is to be acquiring life-saving technology, products, and software for safer communities and protected frontline personnel. So similar in a way to what we're looking to do with defense, but that's ERT, and this is, as I said earlier, it's the reason we initially got into the game, and this is it remains our primary passion in the business. So we've grouped the current businesses according to their focus, and so we've got tech and systems, we've got vehicles, and then we've got wildfire and equipment. So that's how we group them. And In terms of tech and systems in this area, we're focused on manufacturing and distribution of patented and disruptive technology. So that's both for firefighting and for fire protection. So how do we distinguish for those who don't know? Fire protection systems are typically your fire alarm systems. So you'll see that there is fire detectors in this building. There's a fire alarm system. There'll be a fire alarm panel, probably in the basement somewhere. There'll be a sprinkler system. There'll be a whole building management system, and it should all be integrated. Hopefully Donald has done his job on that front. But the point is, that's fire protection, all those types of systems. That's the fire protection industry. It's a massive industry. And then you've got the firefighting industry. Yes, they're closely related. If you go to a trade show, you'll see fire protection companies on one side of the hall, and you'll see all the big fire trucks and everything on the other side of the hall. And typically it's the same industry, but they are segmented. And firefighting, as I said, your firefighting vehicles, your firefighting equipment, your breathing apparatus, the turnout gear that the firefighters wear, all of that is for example, what Georgia Fire sells. That's firefighting. That's the firefighting sector. Now, I come a little bit from that background. A couple of people in this room do too. Dan Peters certainly does. Jason is still an active firefighter, right, Jason? Or did you stop at the end of, you retired at the end of last year? Okay, so yeah, he's a good man to speak to in terms of the industry here in the US. But so that's the tech and systems division. So which businesses fall under that for us? Firebug Technologies, and we have Firebug broken up into two pieces. So in terms of the technologies piece, it's the innovative and patented technology that falls within Firebug. So the firefighting nozzles, the lightweight copolymer vehicle bodies and things like that. BCD Fire and Shareholder Safety, ASSS. I know there's a joke in there somewhere. ASSS. And then CurveXR, and I'll come to CurveXR because there's been some questions about that. So that's what falls in tech and systems. Firebug, this is the company I come from. I joined Firebug in 2014. It's when I first met Nick, and Nick had started a company called Firebug. And really, this is the reason we're here today. This is the platform that we come from. And the first product we had, for those who don't know, was a firefighting nozzle with water mist technology. We still sell that product today. And that's really what got, when I first joined Nick, my job was simply to sell one nozzle. And I traveled the world demonstrating the nozzles in Spain and in India and all over. And we started to ramp up sales for this product. And that's really where we started. So this is our core business. This is our baby, and hugely important to us in terms of where this business goes in the future. So it manufactures patented firefighting equipment and specialized rapid response vehicles. The firefighting nozzles are really what enable the lightweight vehicles. And it's really a disruptive technology in the firefighting sector. Jason Whitby can tell you how disruptive it can be, because if you look at your fire trucks traveling around the US, you all know how slow and cumbersome they can be. But the industry is resistant to change, and it needs change. And it's an industry that is very traditionalist and reluctant to change. So we are pushing hard in terms of expanding Firebug. And as I said, we're selling the technology across primarily in the Middle East, in India, and in Europe. But we need to really make a strong foray into the US market. And I think that's one of the areas where we need to succeed this year. So we've got BCD and ASSS. I mean, I can't really look at that logo much longer. So let me just say that, I mean, he doesn't like a bit of it, but, the name of that company, we always knew it was going to need changing. We couldn't change it straight away. It's going to be changed most likely to Firebug Safety. One of the reasons why, and I'll just jump a few bullet points down, is that they do design and install kitchen suppression systems, data center systems, and things like that. Now, if you know Firebug on the technology side, what's been a key focus for us is our kitchen fire systems, our fixed fighting systems using water mist technology, which are capable of putting out electric fires and things like that, with the use of water only, without any additional chemical agents and things like that, or foam and things like that. So there's a synergy there for us. It's one of the reasons we acquired ASSS. But we always knew that the name would need changing, and so that's going to be happening. But one of the other and also very important reasons was We acquired BCD Fire pretty early on in 2021. BCD has, it took on a large contract, actually installing the fire protection systems at the largest commercial tower in the world, a tower called Burj 2020. I can't remember how many floors it is, but you can Google Burj 2020 and you can see how big that building is. So they've installed the firefighting systems from floor to the top floor, from bottom floor to top floor, and it's been a great project for them in many senses. It's a flagship reference in the region, so it's very important. However, that project has taken them a hell of a long time. It's just been such a massive project, meaning that they've not been able to take on other projects. They've been able to take on other smaller projects, but not other bigger projects. And so bringing on Al-Shola was hugely important to us because it's really just about expanding the manpower, and together those businesses combining to get what's called the A license in the UAE market, which means that they can install fire alarm and firefighting systems in any building and do the maintenance on any of those buildings. So if you know that UAE market, it's a massive market in terms of the buildings. If you travel to Dubai, there's just new buildings being built all the time and proper skyscrapers. What you see here in Miami doesn't even touch sides when it comes to what's going on in that market. So, but being only able to install, for example, the first 12 floors, unless you get a contract award from a subcontractor, which was the case with Burj 2020. What happens when you get awarded something from a subcontractor means you lose a lot in terms of margin. So now combined with ASSS, when they have the A license, they're dealing directly with the engineers, with the end user. The margin skyrockets. It's not being taken by the middleman, the subcontractor, who's really adding no value. It's paying you late. It's a very frustrating business for BCD. So strength in numbers, strength in technical skill and knowledge. The engineering capability that Al-Shola has is phenomenal. They come from a bigger gas suppression business and a large number of engineers. So hugely important for us. I know a lot of people looked at it and was like, well, it's a fairly small acquisition. You guys have said there's all these big things going on, and you announce this Al-Shola deal. For us, it comes down to operational efficiency, profit margins, capability, and just really building a solid foundation for the businesses going forward. And then also within tech and systems is virtual reality and augmented reality training. It's part of the future of the industry. So it's one of the reasons we want to be in on it. Now, you will recall that in 2022 at our last shareholders meeting, we announced that we had signed a deal with CurveXR, and we did. We then actually went on and, in terms of the structure of that deal, shares were meant to be issued at a certain point in time. There were certain deliverables that needed to take place. Some of those deliverables they just couldn't deliver. One of the key areas that affected us, because we have actually still been selling this product, and you would have seen it actually demonstrated at last year's shareholders meeting. Those who saw us at FDIC would have seen the product on display demonstrated there, but it was a wired version. So if you remember, you put on the virtual reality goggles and you had a wire coming out connected to a laptop. That technology was fairly outdated, right? So we were selling it. We were making some progress in the UAE market, but a lot of our customers saying to us, potential customers saying, and there's some large contracts being negotiated, and they would say to us, but we need a wireless version. We've got 1,500 people that need training, and they all need to come into this boardroom and plug into this laptop. We want this thing to be fully mobile. People should be able to do the training at home and things like that, and just get the certification and come back and say, here's my certification, I'm good to go. And so what we did was we went back to the drawing board with CurveXR, and we said, we want the wireless version. Give us the wireless version. The wireless version was built on an Android platform, and it needed to be on a Microsoft platform. So it's a complete software rewrite from their perspective. So what we're looking to do is launch that wireless version, and we've just restructured the deal with CurveXR. But I'm pleased to say that that's coming back into the fold, and it's coming back into the fold in a way that it will give meaningful revenue to us as a business. Otherwise, there's no point in it just being there as another logo when it comes to companies in the group. So that is moving forward, but it's moving forward in a far stronger fashion, in my opinion. And I'm working with them quite closely with the guys at Take Leap that we acquired CurveXR from, and I'm told that they should be ready by the end of this quarter. So that's CurveXR for you. And then we move on to the vehicle division. Currently, we've got vehicle manufacturing capability in the UAE and in the USA in a smaller form, in the form of, no offense, Brett, Bullhead products. But it's key that we, as I said earlier, we expand that vehicle manufacturing capability across the US, and we've got some clear plans, negotiations underway to do that. And Dan might be able to shed a little bit of light on that later. So in the UAE, what do we have? Currently, we manufacture our lightweight rapid response vehicles in there, and it's mostly vehicles that are getting sold to the shopping malls, the resorts, and things like that, right? So typically it's your smaller UTVs. We sell a lot of E-Raptors and Polaris vehicles and things like that with a skid unit, a pump system on the back, a fairly small water tank. We do some bigger vehicles with copolymer vehicle bodies. The vehicle bodies are manufactured in the UK. And yeah, so that's what we currently do. In 2023, we're already working closely with Bullhead now to bring our rapid intervention vehicle technology to market here with the firefighting skid units and things like that. Equipment-wise, we'll come to what we're doing later. But in this area, we've got Firebug Mechanical. So you saw Firebug Technology sits on the tech and system side of the business. Firebug Mechanical, which includes E-Raptor currently, which is the electric UTV, that sits within this vehicle division. We've got TVC, and I'll just jump to that TVC slide while I'm here. A vehicle conversion company that sits with us in the UAE, and really they're converting any manner of vehicles from food trucks. Ambulances is one of the main vehicles that they do, and things like that. And then we've got Bullhead, as you know. Have a chat to Brett. Dan will tell you a bit more about how they've done. I work out a little bit more than Jody, by the way. But Jody's since moved on, and obviously Brett took over as general manager of the business. So Dan will talk to you a bit more about Bullhead. So those are the businesses, and then we've got the E-Raptor Technologies business. So it is still the world's only electric 6-wheeled utility vehicle. Polaris used to make a petrol-driven 6-wheeled utility vehicle. They stopped making it. We still have huge demand for this vehicle. We sell it. That's one of them there in the picture. And there is an improved version that we're looking to bring to market, which actually will have a completely roadworthy L7 vehicle. But where we've struggled is our production challenges. We were not envisioning doing the assembly of the vehicles in the UAE. We wanted to shift that to the EU far earlier. So with that brings me to our investment projects in Serbia, because looking back at E-Raptor, we envisioned that we'd be manufacturing in Serbia by this point in time. That has obviously not happened, but let me just run you through where we're at. So initially, we obtained approval from the Serbian Development Agency for our investment projects. Now, it was specifically initially focused on ILUS EV Technologies, was a company that was the first investment project that was approved. But in principle, we had a number of other investment projects approved for the manufacturing of firefighting vehicles and a wide range, a wide scope to be doing in Serbia. So we had 2 site options, one in Čaček and another one in Rekovac. Čaček being the Čaček site, and that's a photo of Carsten and myself actually standing in front of it, but a number of different factories, a very large site. The Čaček site was the site we wanted to move in. That was the site we were given approval for to move into, and we were told we'd be able to move into that site well within 3 months. So that's obviously not happened. Why has it not happened? As I say, they're not able to adhere to the LOI, but that's for political and geopolitical reasons. So if you go and look at what is happening politically in Serbia and geopolitically in the region, it's pretty easy to see that there's conflict, there's various issues, and politically there's a number of changes happening on that front. So we have the Čaček sites approved. We're ready to move into it. The moment we can move into it, we're just waiting for the government to be able to say, right, you can now move in. There is actually a company still in that site, and we need them to move out in order for us to move in. Upon occupation, and this is just really following our press release on the matter, and it is also in the Form 10. 8 million in government incentives for ILUS EV technologies, and then fairly similar amounts for any other investment projects that we do there. So we had envisioned at the Reykjavik site doing the urban mining, and we had envisioned building firefighting vehicles at those sites. Again, that's covered in the press releases. As I said, the projects are approved. We wish to move in. From our side, we know it's long overdue. If we cannot move in soon, we'll certainly pivot. Nick and I are already discussing ways that we can pivot. It's one of the reasons we are already saying to Dan, let's gear up our US manufacturing capability. We cannot wait much longer for this. A year is pretty much flown by, and we were speaking about this deal back in 2021 already. So unfortunately, when you're dealing with government authorities, they take as long as they take. It's very, very frustrating for us. And so that's Serbia for you. Hopefully that clarifies, because I know that there were a number of questions, but happy to answer any other questions later on too. So our wildfire and equipment division, in this piece falls Georgia Fire, and there is a company, wildfire company, that we're confident we'll bring into the fold pretty soon. Hugely important to us. Why? There's a number of stats and things up there, but if you live anywhere in the US, you should know that your house actually has a wildfire threat score. And every house in the US faces a wildfire risk, I'm told, which is interesting because I wouldn't necessarily think that around here. But that is literally how much the threat has grown of wildfires in this country and a number of countries around the world. So we cannot be an emergency response technologies group of companies if we don't have a number of wildfire technologies and distribution partners and things like that in our group. Fortunately, the business that we're looking to bring into the fold has got 74 distributors. They're manufacturing in 5 countries. They're a strong brand with a very, very aggressive management team. Just, I would say, almost perfectly matched to the way we like to operate. So, and then I've added in there BCD distribution too. That's more for Firebug products and things like that in the US. One of the changes we're looking to make with BCD going forward is they're obviously installing a number of these contracts. We're looking to get a distribution model rolled out through them where they're actually distributing several different types of products, including fire alarm cable, and it's fairly lucrative industry in that market where they operate. So they'll also just for when you see their name under wildfire and equipment, you might think, well, why are they there? We've got the distributor Georgia Fire. We want a local distributor in the UAE market, and that's BCD distribution for us. So after the slide, Dan, if you want to get ready and come up. So I just mentioned Georgia Fire, obviously, because they fall in that category of wildfire and equipment. I'm going to let Dan talk about Georgia. I think that's your first slide, right, Dan? From my side, I just want to say, Jason, great job last year. Really, really well done. And I know not always the easiest of circumstances, but they grew the business. I would say, we've been incredibly spread wide and far as a company, right? So I've not really seen Jason that much, although we've spoken a few times. Obviously, since Dan came on board, it's been a completely different story. But I think what Jason and Sharman and the guys have done at Georgia Fire for me has been incredible. Look, it was with Bullhead and Georgia was our first adventure in the US market, if I can put it that way, right? It's our first 2 acquisitions that we brought on in relatively short succession in this market. And for me to have seen how the 2 businesses have grown over the last year in pretty challenging circumstances, challenging markets, with supply chain issues and all these things, incredible. So I just wanted to I had the slide and more to just say well done to you, Jason, more than for anything, because I know Dan will cover it well. So Dan?
Good morning. Georgia Fire is my first slide. What I wanted to do was spend a little bit of time talking about our existing companies in the U.S. and kind of help you understand strategically why they are part of the group prior to me talking about what our strategy is for future acquisitions. And so think about the fact that just last August, I joined the group. Both these acquisitions were done before that. And if you look at the strategy that JP and Nick had, it was basically they have these products, particularly Firebug, and we want to get them in the US market. And how do we get them there? We get them on trucks and we get them into supply houses like Georgia Fire. And so strategically, there was a great vision that said, let's get our products into the US market. There's a lot of processes and pieces that have to go into that. And so what I've had the fortunate luck of being able to do is work with both Jason and Brett on kind of stabilizing these businesses, putting them in a position where their core markets are solid, and then to be able to really impart on that vision of particularly expanding into the Firebug products. If you look at Georgia Fire, what I want to do is kind of go back and talk a little bit about this past year. 2022, as JP had mentioned, was a pretty solid year. It was a year with a lot of headwinds. Jason and his team fought through a lot of supplier issues, just like in all other industries, lots of supply issues. 1 week lead times were 12 weeks. The next week they were 14 weeks, and the next week they're 28 weeks. As a supplier, that's hard because you don't know how much you're going to have to supply or how far ahead you're going to have to order items so that you can get them to your customers as quick as possible. So between lead time changes and price increase, which are just all over the place, constantly have to stay on top of the prices that you have quoted in front of customers, because with the long lead times, by the time the product come in, the price may have changed. And so very important to manage that supply chain piece. And Jason and his team did a really good job of that. Really, 22 was a growth year. But the biggest thing was, I think, the fact that we maintained really strong relationships with all of our customers, which sets us up for what we believe will be a really strong year in 2023. 2023 is all about how do you expand that business. And there's a couple of key strategies that we're in the process of doing. One is making sure we have the right folks and the right people on the team. And so there's some expansion we have to go through for that team. Particularly, there are some territories that are open to us, in particular North Florida with some of our product lines. And so it's important that we have the resources, both people and demonstration equipment, that we can acquire in order to achieve that expansion. We also see big opportunities on the PPE side. Personal protective equipment. Cancer is a huge issue in the fire service right now. And because of that, fire departments and the cities are being very, very conscious of the gear that they're putting on their first responders. And there's a lot of turnover of that gear throughout the year. And there's a lot of money to be captured in that business. And so one of the models that Jason has in his business is that he utilizes product specialists for particular products. This is an area we've never had a product specialist, and we're now going to recruit as product specialists that focuses in on the PPE market, not only for North Florida, but for our Georgia market also. During the year, we're going to transition to a full-time general manager. Jason, for those of you who didn't know, he was actually a part-time general manager. He was a full-time Atlanta firefighter. Just finished up 30 years of service to the Atlanta Fire Department, and fortunately got out alive. Is done with that, and is going to he's going to continue to be a part of the Georgia Fire team, but he's going to do what he loves to do, and that's sell. And so we're going to focus Jason on the sales side of the business. He and I are going to recruit a full-time sales or general manager to run the day-to-day business, and then that will free Jason up to be able to help the new salespeople and to help the existing salespeople really generate additional opportunities. Along those lines, JP had mentioned, and this is a very important part of this, is that Jason's knowledge of the industry is driving us to be able to help us integrate the Firebug products into the U.S. market. And I'll talk about it a little bit when I talk about the acquisition strategy, but it's very important that we look for opportunities to take our existing technology that we have within particularly the Firebug line and get it into the U.S. market. Although the market's very stubborn there are ways to get new products into it. And so that's really Jason and I's objective, is to work through that strategy as we grow 23 and on to 24. We believe that when we get the right people in place and we focus on this PPE and we get a new territory, that will double the business from 22 to 24. And it's a very profitable business, and so doubling it's going to be very lucrative for the company. Bullhead products. Once again, what I want to do is I'll talk a little bit about 2022, but once again talk about the strategy behind the business. Once again, find a truck builder, put the Firebug skid unit on it, and go to market, right? And there's a few steps we had to work through. What we didn't realize, or I guess we soon realized, was that there were a lot of production inefficiencies that existed at Bullhead when the company was acquired. And probably the best thing that happened to Bullhead during 2022 was in June, JP was able to recruit Brett Groves to come be the general manager. And the amazing thing about Brett was, those of you may not know this, but Bullhead is in a little town called Kodak, Tennessee. If you go there, you're lost. No reason for you to go there. Brett actually was already in Kodak, Tennessee, just bizarre to me. Not only was he in Kodak, Tennessee, he was living on the same street as our facility, right? So JP didn't have to go far to do the recruit. But in all seriousness, just has been a breath of fresh air, a change in culture, a change in attitude. Brett's a lifetime manufacturing guy, has worked with some big companies, some smaller companies, understands everything there is to know about being efficient. And if you saw the Bullhead facility a year ago compared to what it is today, it's literally night and day. When I first, I joined the company in August. When I first went there, I said to Brett, I said, how do you get to 3 beds a week? And he goes, 3? He goes, I'm going to do 4 beds a week. And so his focus is really on how do we maximize that business. 2022 was a tough year, not only from a manufacturing standpoint, but from a chassis availability. All the US truck manufacturers had rough years because of supply chain issues. The good news is a lot of that is now behind us. We talked about the new leadership. He's transformed the facility. The results of that is they had record annual sales, but most importantly, December was the largest month we had ever had until January. I just found out a little while ago that January now is bigger than December. So the trend that we're seeing is that business going in a very, very positive direction. Brett began to establish what I'm calling the first brush truck relationship. We're working with a company that sells a lot of brush trucks. They're looking for someone to partner with. They brought us their chassis. I think somewhere there's some pictures of the actual truck. And we're beginning to build our first one. We're building it with a competitor's skid unit on the back, just so that because the customer already had the skid unit. But it gets us into a market that we've wanted to be in, and we're now building our first one. I think Brett told me earlier that he's got 3 or 4 quotes for additional brush trucks. So that market's going to grow for us, and as it grows, we're going to get our skid unit, our Firebug skid unit, incorporated into what that offering is, and we'll have that available on that truck. 2023, number one is we've got to make sure that right now Brett's doing all the quotes himself, and although he's very good at it, we need him to continue to strategically look at the business. And so we've got some folks within the team that we're beginning to expand their roles to be able to respond to quotes in a more effective or more in a quicker manner. We're going to ride the uptick in trucks, chassis being available. Lots of customers are calling and saying, hey, I got my truck. Now I want my truck bed. And just to give you an idea, we're talking about vets, we're talking about ranchers, we're talking about car dealers, tow truck people, anybody that you see puts a fancy bed on the back of a pickup truck That's us. You take the pickup bed off and you put one of our beds on. And those trucks are starting to flow now from the U.S. OEMs, and we're seeing that in our project. I think Brett told me that his project log went from about 15 to 20 trucks or opportunities he was chasing to now it's somewhere north of 50 on a regular basis, and the phone keeps ringing. So very positive there. We're going to build on that brush truck relationship, as we said. We've got the one customer. Once we know we've proven out that we've got a really good product, we will have something to showcase to some other providers. And then, as I said, we're going to work towards getting the Firebuck skid unit incorporated into that product. The goal for 2023 is pretty simple. We just want to double the business. And based on the performance that we've already seen in January, we are well on our way to accomplishing that. So hats off to Brett and Jason for the great job they're doing running both those businesses for us. And I think strategically, when I started in August, I kind of looked at both the companies and thought, how do we do this? And as we've gotten into it, it's starting to make sense to me that we have an opportunity to incorporate the Firebug product line into both. We still have some heavy lifting to do within the industry to get the product to be accepted. One of those has to do with what I'll talk about in terms of our acquisition strategy. As far as 2023, we obviously want to continue to drive the two existing businesses into their niche markets. But we also want to begin to look for how do we expand that. And as JP had mentioned, one of the keys is going to be that is probably to acquire some manufacturing capability, whether it's our own or whether it's a strategic partnership, but to be able to do some turning and some milling and some manufacturing of our own, so of some of the Firebug technology. By doing that, I think we can get it incorporated into the American product, the American model, much quicker, and will allow us to penetrate the U.S. fire market with that. So a manufacturing piece, we certainly talk about apparatus a lot. Those of you who may recall, my background is on the fire truck side of the business. I've got 20 plus years of selling and building fire trucks. I know all the players, and there's opportunities for us to work with some folks. There's opportunities that we're looking at from a acquisition standpoint. It's a space we want to be in, and we've just got to find the right opportunity at the right time to be a part of it. The market's very strong right now for fire apparatus, and it's a market that's a mess right now. They were hit very hard by labor issues and supply chain issues coming out of COVID. And most of them were not very good at trying to figure it out. When I was in 3 years ago, you could get a fire truck built in about 12 months. Today, most of them are quoting anywhere from 36 to 40 months. There's fire chiefs that are buying fire trucks that say, I'll retire before I ever see this fire truck. And so there's a need for people that understand that business to get back in it. And so we're working with a lot of opportunities there, and very optimistic that we'll see something there. Along the same lines, specialty vehicles. There's a lot of vehicles, support vehicles that serve the fire service, that serve the emergency service market, that serve law enforcement, that a lot of small builders that we're having conversations with also, that we think would be a really strong strategic fit. Not to leave out the dealer distribution side of that business also. Similar to Jason's model, where he's distributing fire equipment, there's an opportunity on the fire truck distribution side also, where there are some dealers that have some exclusive offerings and some territories that are very attractive to us. And so we're talking with a couple of those folks about, once again, either partnerships, strategic acquisitions that allow us to have an exclusive offering in those areas. The good news I can tell you is that JP had a couple of ERTs companies up there in the forecast. We have a lot of projects in our backlog. We have a lot of people that we're talking to, and when we get the timing and the discussions synced up, we'll be ready to go. The most important thing is people, and I've got a strong network of folks that I've met the acquaintance to over the many years of my business, and so we know we can get access to the great leadership team. It's just a matter of bringing together the right ideas at the right time, and we'll make this happen.
Yeah, so that's really brings us to the end of the summary of ERT. If you get a chance to have a drink with Dan later, I'm sure he's got a number of stories he can tell you, both about the industry and just, probably even some stories about how we've been working together over the last few months since he joined us. But we're incredibly grateful to have him on board. He brings a wealth of experience to the team, as I'm sure when you listen to him speak, you can just tell that experience is hugely valuable to us globally and very specifically also for this market. What Dan, in his humility, doesn't say, and he is sometimes a man of few words, a really, really good listener. So great for me because I can talk, forever. But Dan, incredibly measured, very, very strategic. And what he doesn't say is the deals that he is talking, the opportunities that he speaks about in this slide. Some of them are massive, absolutely massive, as a result of his contacts in the industry, and it's one of the important reasons we brought him on board. So I'm quite confident that we'll push forward with some of those this year, and I think that's going to be very exciting for the ERT business. So that brings me to our industrial division, and I'm going to try and be a little bit quicker than what I had originally planned, probably because I've waffled a little bit too much earlier on, so forgive me for that, but hopefully it gives you a good picture of what we've accomplished and where we're at in terms of the emergency response line of business. And in terms of Quality Industrial Corp, a couple of fast facts. Again, a mergers and acquisitions company focused on industrial, oil and gas, and energy/utility sectors. Now, I told you earlier just about the background of us acquiring Wikisoft, the SPV strategy that we have. QIND is the first, I would say, rollout of that strategy. And so far, it's going incredibly successfully for us. It's an SEC reporting company as well. And you might think, well, 200 million revenue in 2023, that's similar to ILUS's, isn't it? It just goes to show how conservative I think we've been in our forecasting. But if you look at Quality International alone, that business is capable of doing a large chunk of that number this year. So Quality International acquired. We signed a binding definitive agreement in the third quarter late second quarter, beginning third quarter 2022. For us, that was the definitive agreement. And we moved forward negotiating some final terms more around how we're going to work together going forward. And that's really why that deal took longer. Was not about getting the deal done. That was agreed before Christmas. It was about what are the next steps with this acquisition that we actually kick off and we work together in a smooth fashion, because it's a big chunky business, and I'll get into a Quality International presentation, and it's just a snapshot of the business, but it'll blow your mind in terms of the assets and just the general scope and size of that business and the huge growth potential there is for it. 2 further acquisitions, as I said, one signed land in my inbox this morning. So, we'll do the necessary and announce that in due course. And then there's another larger one planned. We're in some pretty serious negotiations around a business which is fairly similar to Quality International, both in terms of, mostly in terms of revenue. So, but in a sense, almost a competitor to Quality International. So we're looking to wrap up that process manufacturing space in that market. And we've got a clear plan to spin off and uplist QIND to Nasdaq. We might cover a bit more about that later, but hopefully that will become evident when you start to learn more about QIND itself. So just quickly in terms of the management, and I've put this slide in mostly because we need to be adding to this team. Obviously, we have Nick with his wealth of experience in terms of vision, strategy, his ability to initiate these types of deals, big deals, as our chairman. I'm currently looking after the business as CEO. As many of you may know, I've not been, CEO of Shell or anything like that previously. I'm not 60 or anything like that. So we'll be looking to recruit a very experienced CEO into QI&D, and that we'll look to do at the start of the second half of the year, most likely when we've got some more deals done and we've done some consolidation. My strength is obviously closing deals. So I'm looking to bring some more deals into the group and then hand over to a very experienced CEO. We've got Carsten again as our Chief Commercial Officer. It's an SEC reporting company. It's incredibly important that the work he does. And then we've got Louise and Murti. We've got Dan also sitting there, and obviously a shoulder to lean on when we're looking to do more work here in the US and things like that. We have a business development director that's already working closely with Quality International. They joined in October. We are looking now to bring on a managing director, most importantly for the consolidation of that acquisition of QI into the group. A financial director for QI&D, hugely important when just the complexity of Quality International alone. That company has got over $150 million in current purchase orders in hand. And each purchase order is like 20, 25 pages long with just line items and it's a very, very complex business. And we're looking to work very closely with them on the financial side. So it's very important that we bring an experienced financial director in to handle that. And then, as I said, Q2 2023, that should be possible. The challenge for us is always finding the right people that have a similar mindset to Nick and myself, that can really take businesses forward in the way that we look to. And then just the cost. That's always a challenge. So just very quickly cover this earlier, but in terms of that timeline, we are looking to add further acquisitions. As I said, one has just been signed, an additional one. Another one that we're working on, but it's really the consolidation of the businesses. That's hugely important. This quarter in particular is working closer now with Quality International whilst we're getting these other deals done. So won't spend too much time here. I'm going to go into just what will hopefully be a brief presentation on Quality International itself. Bear in mind, guys, this is a $300 million company, right? So we negotiated very, very hard in terms of getting this acquisition done. But as you'll see, and really what I'm trying to do in this presentation is just give you a snapshot of how incredible this business is and how much value and how much synergy it brings to us as a at this stage, I guess you could say a mini conglomerate. So the company itself specializes in manufacturing and assembling of process equipment, piping and modules. That's for various sectors, although primarily the oil and gas sector. So they've been around for a while, two decades of experience in manufacturing, all the certifications and accreditations that are required by the likes of Shell, Chevron, all of the big companies globally. You can see that down the bottom of the slide. So enormous capability from design right through to installation, very broad. The workforce is of over 1,350, and that obviously increases during peak periods. I nearly said that number like Joe Biden sometimes says numbers, got a bit confused there, but 1,350 employees. Sorry, I'm going to kick myself for saying that later. But watch one of his videos and you'll know why. So state-of-the-art manufacturing facilities, over 10 million square feet. We'll get into a bit of that in the presentation. And in terms of references, Gasco, I'm not sure how many of you come or know the industry, the oil and gas industry, but there's obviously a number of familiar names that you'll all know there. BP, Shell, Total, Sonatrach. There's many more, Technip, some huge global contractors as well as customers. So in terms of the segments that they operate in, yes, it's oil and gas, extends a fair bit further than that. Power and desalination, wastewater, offshore and onshore. Really anything that's heavy engineering related. When I show you some of the references, what they build for their customers. It's anything heavy engineering for these industries. It's massive projects that they're typically involved in. So in terms of that manufacturing range, what I'll do is I'll just tell you one aspect of the range, and I'll just quickly show you some of the references. And these are actual projects deliveries for customers when you see the pictures. So pressure vessels, that's what a pressure vessel looks like. It's probably the biggest part of their business, and a number of projects. This one for ExxonMobil, 120. One project, for example, 120 of these pressure vessels. All right, so it gives you some sort of idea for the end user being ExxonMobil. Again, ExxonMobil, another project. So obviously, enormous scope, these projects. Another customer, I've tried to pick out some of the US customers. They have customers all over the world, and you'll see that on a map later. Opera Energy, Houston, Texas. Again, stainless steel columns. And then one of their biggest projects to date, this was 178 of these pressure vessels, 24 modules and skid units. I'll come to modules and skid units later. But this was one of their biggest projects for Sasol. And then heat exchangers, some of the references, projects in Chile. Just delivering these products alone is a phenomenal achievement. Pipe spools, fabrication, and piping systems. So this is some of the facilities where they actually manufacture the pipe spools, and just what they look like when they're completed. A lot bigger than that, actually. And then modular assemblies, we call them sometimes skid units, but massive skids. So just show you this big project again. You saw the heat exchangers, the columns earlier. This ethane cracker project, which was delivered to Texas, and that's 16,000 tons of these skid units. So that's one skid unit. They delivered 24 of them, and that's what they looked like when they were being assembled before they got shipped off. And there's actually a really good video. I'm not sure if any of you have seen it, but we'll put it out on YouTube, which shows how they delivered these skid units, loaded them onto the ships before they went off to Houston. So just gives you an idea of that scope. This was obviously just before they got delivered. Obviously a huge project for the business. I think the order was in the region of $90 million at that time. So that was for the heat exchangers and the skid units. In terms of facilities, as I said, over 10 million square feet of manufacturing facilities. This just gives you a very short snapshot of some of it. They've got stainless steel fabrication shops, carbon steel fabrication shops. There's open yards for carbon steel, stainless steel, tanks, you name it, and prefabrication shops. There's painting booths, spray booths, and all sorts. They've obviously also got a waterfront facility, very important, because these big skid units, these heat exchangers, the majority of their product is getting exported to various markets, including the US. And this waterfront facility, there is a second one planned. This is one of their waterfront facilities, obviously, where it gives them the ability to also assemble at this facility before it gets shipped off. So, and then of course, some synergies here for us in our business, because we are actually looking at moving some pieces of our manufacturing into quality international's facilities. Why? They've got CNC machines, they've got a lot of things that smaller businesses would need, and it's at our disposal there for us to use as we see fit. So that is something that we're also doing behind the scenes. But again, this is just a very small snapshot. So I'll just click through all of these. Their customers exist all over the world. They've been exporting to everything from Algeria through to Yemen, a number of projects in the US, of course, a number in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, and in the Middle East with the likes of ADNOC and things like that. But I think this just hopefully paints you a picture of the business for us. This is awesome, and it's great. The balance sheet is phenomenal and all of that, but it's mostly about the growth opportunity that exists for this company. In terms of manufacturing capacity, currently, they have around $600 million worth of revenue that they could generate in terms of the current manufacturing capacity that they have. They have previously been a $100 million revenue business consistently prior to COVID. As I said, I would expect they have $154 million in current purchase orders. They have over $200 million of orders in negotiation. Their sales pipeline is, I think, over $2 billion. So the growth potential is phenomenal. There's a lot of areas where we can bring some of our, just various bits of expertise. There are operational inefficiencies in the business. There is a lot of areas for that business to improve. Many of that we've been able to see and identify already in terms of management and things like that. There's huge growth potential for us, and that's really what we're starting to sink our teeth into. That's why it's important to bring those team members on board and things like that. So there is a much longer presentation on QI. We'll try and do something on YouTube in the next couple of weeks. I think it'll be important for you guys to really see a lot more of it, including hopefully we can package that together with some of the other deals that we're doing at the right time, and we can put it all together and do a full presentation. One thing I do want to say on QI&D is we do plan for QI&D to have its own shareholder meeting, by the way. So there is a huge milestone that we have planned for this business, and I think that will be an opportune time for us to gather together as a QI&D have a shareholders meeting together. So I've tried to keep this brief, knowing that down the line we will have a shareholders meeting specifically for that, and we'll have brought obviously a number of experienced hands onto the team by that point in time. So that is QI&D, and at this point I'm just going to ask Nick to come up. He's going to give us just a bit of an update on Replay, and hopefully that's given you guys a good overview so far.
Thanks. I think there was one thing that we left out of the QI&D part is you saw the size of those process plants that they're building. The value of the firefighting systems on those plants is off the charts. And obviously, as you heard JP mention earlier, the certification of our own firefighting systems is high on our agenda through the course of this year. And so the amount that they're spending on firefighting systems now, buying from third-party manufacturers, will all eventually be able to be replaced by our own technology. And water mist technology on its own is highly recommended in the oil and gas sector on the offshore plants. Anyway, so moving on. Thanks, JP, for that. So moving on to Replay. Been a little bit quiet in terms of our shareholder representation around this particular business. One, because we've been heavily dependent on the Serbian facility. So there was a second investment project in Serbia for a huge plant in Serbia, which obviously for the same reasons has been held up. But let me just tell you a little bit about it. So what is actually called urban mining, which is a relatively new term that's come around over the last, let's say, 5-7 years, and is starting to gain massive momentum. It's essentially about, it's not really recycling and it's not really mining, it's something in the middle. And it's really simply about taking waste electronics, crushing them down and removing the precious metals. Now, it may not sound very interesting, but let me tell you this. So in 1 ton of gold ore out of the average gold mine out of the world, if you get 5 grams of gold out of 1 ton of rocks from a gold mine, you've done really well. The average is somewhere between 3 and 5 grams of gold. In 1 ton of cell phones, just cell phones, 1 ton, guess how much gold? Between 210 and 240 grams of gold. But that's not even the real income stream. You've got copper, platinum, palladium, tin, aluminium, and it's a waste product. It's a product that every single one of you are throwing away. Who hasn't got a bunch of cell phones in their drawer, kitchen drawer, bedside drawer, cell phone chargers, laptop chargers? In theory, there's enough waste electronics on Earth to pretty much power the demand of the minerals that we need for manufacturing globally. That's the theory. The challenge behind it is obviously the supply chain. How do we get it from your bedside drawer into a gold bar and certified out the other end? That's the challenge that this market particularly has. And those of you that know me, I'm quite disruptive in my thinking, and I like to turn things upside down. And I believe we've got a good strategy around how we're going to do that. So it's currently, we've got a very, very small facility in Dubai at the moment. Obviously, as I said, we were planning to scale that up to the Serbia site, which is delayed slightly. Now, during that delay, we've got into negotiations with arguably one of the biggest waste recycling manufacturers in the Middle East and Africa. And we're pretty far down the line in terms of an acquisition. I'm hoping that we're going to get that done this quarter, in which case it'll actually change some of our strategy because we'll be able to reverse all of our recycling operations into this. And that's actually what it looks like, the bottom right-hand side. So essentially what happens is the electronics come in, they get crushed down, then through density and magnetism and various different chemical processes, you then separate the plastic from the copper, from all the different types of metals, and then it goes through various different refining processes. So not only is this highly profitable, it's very environmentally responsible, which again is a big part of our business ethos. So the sector is anticipated to reach about 38 billion. And as I said, it's a relatively new sector. And there's very few operators in the space. The CAGR of 13%, which is pretty phenomenal for growth. There's not many sectors growing at that speed. Right, so it's obviously highly important from an environmental point of view, a life safety point of view, the physical demand. If you look at all the cell phone batteries, all the laptops, they all have huge amounts of nickel, huge amounts of lead, huge amounts of all these different metals, which we don't want to go to landfill, which the majority of them are going to landfill. And the first world has been particularly bad at this over the last 30 years. Package it up, send it to Africa, bury it in Africa, package it up, send it to China. That obviously can't, that leaching is now happening. If you look at the water, if you Google urban mining, Uganda, Ghana, those are countries that they're literally children dying because they're drinking the river water that's now been poisoned by this waste. And the market is growing. So the problem, although the problem is ginormous now with waste, and we're obviously going to help to solve this problem, it's growing. So there's going to be 25 to 50 billion internet connected devices. You can imagine what that's going to be in the next 40 years. So we've got to not only make a huge difference to the environment, but we're also going to make a huge difference to our own profitability and our own balance sheet. So what do we process? Basically any waste electronics. That's right the way down to the batteries. Bear in mind, a lot of the batteries have lithium, which has a huge demand globally. And there is technology out there. We don't have our own technology, but there's a lot of technology out there for reprocessing lithium. To process the PC boards, cables, wires, chargers, etc. I believe that business on its own can probably get into the 150 million revenues within the next couple of years. The business that we're looking to acquire now has about $25 million revenue. And we're pretty close to the end of the negotiation. So I'm hoping, as I said, we get that done during this quarter, which will then really put this business on the map. We've got a scientist, unfortunately he couldn't be here for this, a guy called Shane Fowley, Irish guy. He's a scientist by trade, who runs the replay business, and we'll be looking to bring in some more experienced team. And as I said, it's quite a new sector, so there's not a lot of those people around. We're gonna have to create them ourselves, from hybridizing mining executives to chemical engineers, etc. So anyway, thank you very much. I'm sure you'll hear more on replay in a little while.
Thanks, Nick. All right, so just welcome Chris and Tim up. Just give you a brief little introduction to Hyperion. If you think back to the slide with the 4 subsidiaries, we mentioned, and we have been talking even as far back as the last shareholders meeting, we were talking about having a defense subsidiary. We've spoken about it in a series of PRs. I know some people don't always enjoy the updates, but really it's important because when we talk about things going on behind the scenes, eventually they do come to fruition. And I think largely you'll see that that's the case with pretty much everything that we talk about. I would like to think we always deliver. We're not always on time, but we always do deliver. And this next step with Hyperion is a huge step forward for us as a business in terms of taking that defense subsidiary forward. And when Chris and Tim speak, you'll straight away understand that there's a wealth of knowledge there, there's a wealth of experience there. And what we've done, just so you know, with Hyperion is we've been looking at acquisitions and thinking to ourselves, we're spread very wide, we're spread very far as a business. We have to deliver on the ERT front, we have to deliver on the QI&D front, we've got to deliver on the replay front, as Nick has just said, because you guys have known about replay for some time now. And we want to deliver. We have these acquisitions literally at our fingertips. We want to bring them in, but we've got to have a good team that can actually manage this defense business and take it forward. And Chris and Tim, we've known them for some time. They have had a number of really impressive ideas of how they could take this business forward, including their own technology that they wanted to bring into the fold. And so we formed Hyperion Defense with them. ILUS is the majority shareholder. They are shareholders of the company, and we're taking that forward as really like Replay, the head of that defense subsidiary. And there's a number of acquisitions that they have lined up. So you'll start to hear a lot more from Chris and Tim. I'm not going to steal any of their thunder. I probably have already. So I don't know who's starting. Is it you, Chris?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, so they will tell us about Hyperion and some of their plans and just really just the industry in general that they're operating in. And I think it's pretty darn exciting.
Thanks, JP. Conscious that it's lunch in about 10 minutes. We'll try and rattle through this quickly, but if we're going over, if you're hungry, just throw something at us and we'll get the point. So I think it's important just to give you a feel of who we are, our backgrounds. I think that's quite important at the early stages. So I joined the British military, served for 18 years as an officer in the artillery. And the artillery transitioned quite a lot over the time I was serving. So when we went to Iraq, there was a big transformation. So not just about firing artillery and one gun, we're trying to now integrate fires from fast jets, from attack helicopters, mortars, artillery, naval surface fires. That is called joint fires. And it's the integration of all of that in a three-dimensional battle space, which is where we kind of went with the artillery. And my experience took me to my final operational tour. So I did Bosnia, 2 tours of Iraq, and then finished in Afghanistan, where I was Chief of Staff Joint Fires for Helmand Province. So Helmand was the most kinetic province in Afghanistan, and I was responsible for ensuring that we had the correct assets in place in order to support the guys on the ground who were going out and patrolling and interacting with the locals. After I retired from the military, I moved across to the UAE, where I served the UAE military for 10 years as a contractor. And we built the same, that joint fires capability for the UAE. When we arrived, they literally had no capability in that area. And in the 10 years we were there, we built a world-class, internationally accredited by the US governing body capability that served them on operations. And they became quite active regionally, and it became one of their kind of prime capabilities. It was something that was a big ticket item for the Crown Prince. So we were quite fortunate because he took an interest, the checkbooks were open, and we could build them a pretty good capability. My background in the military is kind of broad across different areas. So training, operations. I spent a lot of time in defense procurement as well, which kind of puts me in a good position now to transfer into a more commercial space. But the depth of experience of 18 years in the British military and 10 years serving another military stands me in good stead for that. Tim.
Afternoon, everybody. Yeah, so Tim Gray. Like Chris, I also served in the British Army for quite a long period of time, 16 years. Initially, I was in the Royal Corps of Signals, so telecommunications background. I did 2 sort of blocks in the army, if you like. So the first one was in the signals, where I was served in Bosnia doing secure communications during the NATO mission in the former Republic of Yugoslavia, and then subsequently in Northern Ireland, after doing an IT degree within the military, I then was managing some intelligence information systems in Northern Ireland. After that, I left, came back in, and when I came back in, my specialism then became more in terms of education, training, development. So in that role, I got involved in being basically a training development advisor for the infantry at the infantry battle school, training and writing the training for junior commanders in a dismounted close combat role. So a lot of guys that were then going off as young leaders to Iraq, Afghanistan at the time. I then ended up doing a master's degree in computer-based learning and training, which had a heavy, my dissertation was basically on simulation and employing simulation to training within the military. So that's kind of where my career went. I got involved in some policy jobs and things like that before leaving the army. And like Chris, I've been out to the UAE as well. So the same capability, Chris and I have been working together, developing the joint fire side of it, me more on the training element. So did the training needs analysis, wrote the curriculum, developed the training, which is seen as a sort of global best practice. And we also integrated simulation quite heavily into that. The UAE invested a lot of money into it. So we were lucky to be able to do that. So we learned a lot in that process in terms of developing that capability. As JP said, obviously Hyperion's majority owned by ILUS, so we're part of the ILUS group. You can see the mission and vision on the slide there. The website's live now as well, so you can go on there and have a look at, get a bit more detail. Really, in terms of our strategy, the strategy that we've been developing with ILUS and ourselves, the top three words really encapsulate it. It's about providing effective capability. Now, in military terms, capability can just mean a new piece of equipment. So some countries might throw money at something, buy something new, but that's not the whole story. In order for that to be effective, you have to implement that properly across lots of different areas. And our experience, both in the military and afterwards, has given us that broad breadth of experience to be able to do that. Protecting the warfighter, you heard JP mention that as well. That's key to us, as it's key to ILUS in terms of public safety and the frontline soldier, sailor, and airman. So we want to do all we can to go down capability areas that protect the individual. Now, the areas that we're looking at as well, we want to focus on areas that have quite niche technical expertise. We're quite broad technically, and we've got areas in which we're deep. But obviously, in terms of military capability, it can be massively broad. So we've also got a very good network of colleagues that we've developed over the last 30 years, pretty much, in different areas. And we're quite lucky in that we'll be able to call on that sort of network now to assist us in specific areas. But we're kind of going to be providing the glue, you know, across Hyperion, across the different areas to bring it all together. We figure that, you know, these sort of technical niche areas, you're going to get the best of return on investment in those, because where there's technology and innovation, there's obviously good opportunities to generate revenue. And, you know, we're looking at huge potential for growth in the areas that we're going to talk about now and other areas as well. So we're looking at this year to achieve 20 million plus in terms of revenue through acquisitions and also other partnerships and winning business, not just in the UAE, but globally. So the final thing, obviously, in terms of defense budgets, you can see there, it's a huge market. Okay, so over $500 million in 2022, expected to rise to kind of $500 billion. So it's going to rise to 700 billion by 2027. So it's a huge area. We all know what's happening in the world today. You know, one conflict finishes, Afghanistan, now Ukraine is happening. It's an uncertain world, and it's a world where defense is always going to be in a growth area.
And the model we're using, as you can see there, is, you know, through acquisitions, and we're not necessarily just talking about acquisitions of companies, as you can see in the diagram below. Sometimes an acquisition isn't necessarily the best way to go, and sometimes that company isn't going to be acquired at that particular point in time. So we want to build strong partnerships, acquisitions, and intellectual property right purchases to form a full capability offering across different streams of defence. At the moment, we're focusing on 3 different streams of defence. The intention is that gets broader and broader over time, but our initial focus is on 3 particular areas, of which we'll cover now.
Okay, so the first area that we're looking at is counter IED. When we talk about IED, you've probably heard that phrase before, improvised explosive device. It's really about force protection, so it goes back to that protecting the warfighter thing. And in Afghanistan, UK and American casualties, 65% of those were as a direct result of IED strikes on friendly forces. So just to give a broad idea, what we're talking about here is the detection. So detecting an IED, then locating the exact position of it, identifying what that IED is, and then dealing with the threat. It's a growth area in defense, again, for the reasons I've just mentioned, and the figures are up there. So it's going to be growing substantially over the coming years, which is why, you know, not only for, you know, in terms of, it's going to be good in terms of revenue, but also, as I say, the protection side of things. And it's going to continually evolve. You always see in the military, you know, your enemy will always evolve. So this area is also technologically, it's going to be very fast paced. And we want to keep up with that and evolve with the threat. So I won't go into too much detail about the different areas, but it's essentially, we're talking about the detection and the defeat of these devices. Jamming is a big thing, electronic countermeasures, and that's really where the technology bleeding edge is where we want to be. UAS, everybody talks about drones. It's very talked about all the time on the news, and drone strikes here, drone strikes there. So you can use unmanned aerial systems to assist you in your counter ID effort, but there's also counter UAS as well. So companies are developing strategies to defeat enemy drones through jamming, GPS spoofing, things like that. And across all of these different areas, then we go back to the training and the curriculum side of it. So even though we don't necessarily have massive deep knowledge in this subject matter area, we've got the expertise and the training. We'll pull people in, and then we can collaborate together to produce the offering. And a good example here, bottom right, there's a picture of the guy that we're going to be bringing in. It was a while ago now in Northern Ireland. He'd neutralized a £2,000 device of homemade explosives. Just one of the things that he's done. Over the years, he's been working in special forces, UK special forces, in all the different major conflict areas. He's an operator, he's done sales. We're going to bring him on board as an example of someone that's going to assist us in developing this area. We're currently, in terms of opportunities, we've begun negotiations to acquire the IPR for an ID detector, which is, again, bleeding edge kind of technology. You might say, well, how is it going to be that easy to acquire it? Well, this is a good example. The company that produce it, they don't have the expertise to then sell it and market it. So we're essentially going to acquire the rights to manufacture that equipment, and then we will be able to then sell it globally through our contacts and connections. And we've also got partnerships with a couple of other companies in this industry, one medium-sized in cyber electromagnetic activities, and they also deal in counter ID, counter drone, and another one, a much smaller company that are looking to do a tech transfer, or white labeling of their equipment through us, with potentially in the future, then that might turn into an acquisition.
The second area is joint closed air support. And as you can see, it involves the integration of air, land, and sea fires at the same time and place to create the greatest effect in having an effect on the enemy. The US lead this program, so they bring together 27 partner nations that all have to align themselves to a particular standard. That enables all those 27 nations to be able to speak to each other's aircraft and to be able to do stuff in a safe and efficient manner. So belonging to that organization is quite powerful. It's a good selling point to smaller nations. It gives them access to US air power, which, if everything goes wrong, is what they're all going to want. The 27 nations, if you were to kind of graph that out in terms of the growth, it's been pretty significant, clearly over the period of Iraq and Afghanistan, but it's continuing to grow. So a perfect example is NATO now are looking at 7 new nations wanting a JTAC program. It might be 9, depending on whether 2 join NATO in the coming days. In the GCC, the success we had in the UAE, all the other GCC nations want a piece of it as well. COVID has kind of slowed that process down, but we're now ready to jump on those opportunities. As you can see, the capability areas, and again, this is trying to give a full capability offering. Now, it might be that a particular nation doesn't need the full capability offering because they're quite mature and don't necessarily need us to provide training and curriculum, but we might be able to provide simulation systems. But what we want to do is give the full offering to new nations, but we can take a piece of it out to continue to operate with the existing nations. In terms of the opportunity, so in the GCC, there's the Saudi program and the Qatar program are 2 big programs that are coming up. At the moment, we're not going to be competing against the defense giants, the likes of CAE and Kinetic and Cubic. So we're already working with them to work as a subcontractor. So there's going to be areas, in particular, the stuff we were doing in the UAE in terms of the doctrine and policy and the training and curriculum. They don't want to get involved in that. They want to sell the equipment and walk away. Well, we'll glue it together and we'll work to them as a subcontractor. And we're already in negotiation with one of the major defense primes to pick up that. That just gets us a foot in as many nations as we can, building reputation. But the smaller nations, so Oman, Kuwait, who don't have the same budget, we're there ready, and we're dealing with those nations now to give them a better cost-effective answer. We don't have the same overheads as Cubic, and we can give them, still making profit. We can give them the same kind of solution, and we can do it, that's something that suits their size. We're also partnering with a UK aerospace company, so they're looking at building a cost-effective close air support platform. So they can't go and buy F-16 or A-10 aircraft. They can't afford it. So this company's looking at buying a cheap solution that countries with lower budgets can then use. They need the capability, but they can't buy these expensive operational aircraft. That will be complementary if we get into that program, if we start building a relationship with them in terms of offering the likes of contract close air support. So in terms of how you train these guys, it's, we're trying to keep the costs down, or the nations try and keep the costs down. So they can't fly everything with live aircraft. Using an F-16 is about $15,000 an hour. So they use simulation to replicate it. It's clearly very cost effective for them, but it doesn't replicate live or dry controls. So what they're trying to do is buy a cheaper contract CAS platform, so using commercial aircraft with retired aircrew that are used to these procedures, and do it for cheaper before they then move on to the crescendo bit at the end, which is using the operational aircraft. We've also got a couple of bids in for some smaller UK JTAC simulation programs. An opportunity arose because of the previous big contracts didn't satisfy what the UK needed, so they want these smaller ones. That's a great opportunity for us, and if we can get in and build reputation in the UK, that's a badge of honour that we can then use as leverage out to some of the other nations. And also with regard partnerships, so last week we were up in Atlanta working with one of our close partners in the simulation world. I'd love to talk a lot more about that, but conscious of time, we may try and get something out to you in terms of getting some videos from the next exhibition, which is next week actually in Virginia Beach, and also in IDEX in the UAE, the 20th to the 24th. But the point, going back to, I think, one of the earlier slides, where it's how do we add value to these acquisitions? The technology that this company had, when we spent the last week with them, we could interpret how the customer actually wanted this to be used. And as a result of the week we spent, they've actually changed their marketing strategy of how they're selling that equipment, because we're telling them how these can be incorporated better into programs, which they don't have the knowledge of. So when we do the acquisitions, it's about integrating the acquisitions with each other where synergies exist, and us offering the added value of how this fits into a broader capability offering to nations.
So simulation, Chris mentioned it a little bit there in terms of the joint close air support area, but it's not just about this particular area. Simulation is an effective training tool in pretty much any industry now. So it's used across the board, but particularly within the military, when you're training any sort of skill, you want to have some sort of simulation aspect in there. It's just part of that training continuum. So we see this as an area that we have experience in. We've developed some good top sort of simulation strategies in the UAE. We've worked very closely with partners in the industry whilst in the UAE, and we're continuing to do so now. So we're looking to have relationships with companies that produce the hardware. So we're talking traditional dome screens, which you can, from the images there on the top right, you've got screens, projectors, PCs, etc. And then you integrate software with that to provide the physics engine for the world that is being simulated, and then the image generator to show that image onto the screens. And then finally, you need to integrate equipment into a lot of these simulation systems. So for example, again, on that top image there, you see there's a lot of equipment which has to replicate what the individual is using in the real world. But it also has to be able to integrate with the simulation itself. So, and there's quite a lot of money, obviously, in producing these things. So that's the more traditional side, but we're also keen to really sort of push forward on the extended reality side kind of things now. So by that, we mean the three different aspects. So virtual reality, where you're in a completely virtual environment. mixed reality where it's real equipment overlaid onto a virtual environment, and then augmented reality, which is real world with virtual overlaid over the top of that. The augmented thing is still pretty early days, but we're confident that we're going to be pushing forward some pretty cutting edge stuff in terms of the mixed reality thing. And Chris was mentioned, that was kind of what Chris was talking about before, what we're doing next week. And obviously that has synergy with some of the things JP was mentioning in terms of the fire safety and the Curve XR and that sort of stuff. So we see this as having utility across the group.
Finally, to talk about Millennium. So there's a partnership that was existing previous to us coming on board between ILUS and Millennium. They're particularly focused on the autonomous vehicles, and you can see the Ajima vehicle in the bottom left picture, which is pretty versatile in terms of you can put different payloads on the back. You can use it for load bearing behind a dismounted infantry platoon. You can put medical evacuation people on board that, get the casualty back to the first aid post far quicker. So it's a pretty capable vehicle, and we're looking forward to continuing the partnership on behalf of ILUS with Millennium. In summary, I know it's been a quick whiz through, and we've probably gone over time. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to speak to you all. We're both, as veterans, we are passionate about delivering effective capability to the warfighter. That's our passion. From our perspective, we wouldn't be here doing this if we didn't believe in the vision of ILUS, and that's genuine. So, we believe in the vision. We're getting the backing from JP and Nick, and we're particularly confident, and we look forward to next year providing you with an update on how successful we've been. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Chris. Right, so hopefully we've come to the end of the first session. There's still a lot to come from us. There's some very chunky pieces in the second session after lunch. So from my side, I hope we've really shown you within the four subsidiaries what we've been doing. Some phenomenal accomplishments last year and the start of this year. A lot going on in the various businesses, as I'm sure you can tell. A wealth of expertise on board, and still more to come. So, yeah, I trust it's been a good session. You've learned a lot, and I think let's eat. Food is through that door, the other side. You need to get, apparently, I'm told you need to get one of these gold bracelets from Anne-Marie. You need that for tonight. So, but you can eat without any bracelets. But you can't drink without a bracelet. So I didn't make the rules, So anyway, shoot through for some food if you want, and I look forward to catching up with you when we're through there.
Afternoon, everybody. Do you mind just taking your seats? All right, guys, thanks very much. Hope lunch was okay. We've probably got, hopefully we can do
better than last year.
Hopefully we can wrap this up pretty quickly so you can get your Friday afternoon in the bar underway. I know you've been super patient all morning. Hopefully you've learned some stuff you didn't know about our business and have a chance to share that information with your colleagues and friends and in the Discord room and everything. There's obviously a vast amount of info we've got to get you in a short period of time. Obviously, since our last shareholder meeting, obviously there's a fundamental change that we've now become fully reporting. I.e. what that means is we're far more limited on what we can actually say around most of this slide. But obviously I know this is probably the most interesting for everybody's demands. So we'll try and cover it as best as we can. So I think starting from our roadmap, our plans and roadmap hasn't changed since we started as a company. So I think hopefully just from today you've sort of gathered that, and it's been, let's say, reinstated of our bigger plans, and everything that we've said that would mature has matured and will mature. I want to just clarify one thing from this morning's session that the market seems to have had tears about. The Serbia deal is not cancelled, it's just delayed. I don't know why everyone seems to have been crying that the Serbia deal is literally just cancelled because they had a change in cabinet, a bit of a shuffle around of cabinet, and they're kind of reissuing signing powers and stuff. So that's coming online. It's not cancelled. Anyway, so moving on. So our roadmap is pretty clear. we're on a race to get to 1 billion of revenue, but not just 1 billion of revenue, 1 billion of profitable revenue, and ideally with as little debt as possible. Obviously, getting to our current position, obviously we're relatively debt heavy. We believe it's with good parties and good investors that we're really comfortable with. So which has obviously changed fundamentally from the history of ILUS. But we've got a very clear focus on where we're trying to go on that. JP laid out earlier in terms of the company structure with SPVs. Now, historically, it probably didn't make that much sense to have independent SPVs or publicly listed SPVs for each, let's say, business sector. Historically, you would have just clubbed them all together. However, that's not really our strategy for a number of reasons. One is because our sectors are quite diverse, although we have the underlying overlap of where we add value across them. So, for example, replay, wise urban mining, it's not just an opportunity of profitability and environmental awareness. It's also, don't forget, we have an EV business we're developing with the eRaptor, where we obviously have batteries. And obviously batteries have a massive shortage of lithium in the future. So all our businesses in one way or another are connected, although from a high level, they may not look connected. And as time goes on, slowly, more of that synergies and where we can add value between the businesses will start to become clearer. But I think the overall, coming back to the SPV, the overall plan of independent SPVs is because of our conglomerate strategy. I think going back to the first shareholder meeting last year, we made it pretty clear that we want to be the next Berkshire Hathaway. And we're on that plan, and I'm not going to wait 40 years for it, that I promise you. So in order to do that, all those businesses are going to grow to substantial value on their own. And obviously to grow, they need to be able to raise their own capital. And especially at the moment, the access to the capital markets is not what it was 2 years ago or even 5 years ago. And obviously, we've spoken continually about maintaining our share structure as much as we can, but still at the same time raising capital, which is obviously a very, very fine balance. I mean, we don't go into the public markets for fun. The whole idea of being in the public markets is the ability to raise capital, A, liquid capital, but B, also that have a value behind your shares that you can acquire companies with your own paper, which probably you've seen if you look at the QIND deal and some of how we structure some of the deals. It gives us that leverage that we're able to acquire companies with very little cash down. So I know, I'm kind of the slides all mixed. I'm talking on a whole, let's say, montage here. On the SPVs, they allow us to raise individual money benefiting ILUS, ultimately without affecting the ILUS share table. So if you look at the QIND deal, we've acquired a $300 million company. ILUS owns 77% of it. So that is going to have a benefit to the ILUS balance sheet. It has to, although it hasn't reflected yet. Inevitably it will, whether it's today, tomorrow, next week, or next year. It has to. I mean, it's physical maths. It can't go any other way. So when you look at the SPV structure, that's sort of what I want you guys to understand is why that's done like that. Because ultimately, each one of those special purpose vehicles, those SPVs, will be uplisted on their own at some point in time. Every single one of them. It's just the time period. Some of them may be ready much quicker, like QIND, for example. Some of them may take much longer to cultivate, like the replay business, for example. That will take much longer to cultivate before that's ready for a major market. But at the end of the day, we anticipate, if you think back to that slide earlier in the presentation, which was the same one we used last year, it's that funnel. As we're building up the SPVs, getting them to critical mass, getting them on their own steam, we uplist them. ILUS is the beneficiary. At the same time, we're pulling in new deals, new sectors. Today you've heard about Hyperion. Hopefully by next year, Hyperion will be right up on our food chain, and there'll be new SPVs developing out. So that sort of company roadmap. I'm not going to go any more. I think you've got it. Subsidiary uplist. So as I just said, the plan is to uplist all of those businesses. We don't go into any sector that doesn't have real scale. If it's not a multi-billion-dollar sector and we can't get a serious chunk of the market share, we're just not interested. Just not. So all of those businesses have the potential. Now we talk about our share structure. There's not really a lot to say. I think I'll cover just 2 points. One is on my preference shares, because I know there was a lot of chatter about that early in the year that I'm going to sell all my shares. Of course, I'm not selling my share. I haven't sold one single share. I've got no intention to. But also as part of our uplist plans, I've also signed a lockup. So my shares are not going to get sold anytime. For the foreseeable future. So I don't know. I know on the Discord room, there was a lot of chat with the short sellers and whatever through the summer. So I'm just clarifying that point. All my shares and preference shares are properly locked up. So they're not going anywhere. And we're all in it for the long term. I mean, there's not one single staff member that's either got shares or bought shares that hasn't that's sold. So I know we had originally said we wanted to get it down to 1.3, down to $1 billion or below $1 billion in shares, which obviously I moved my shares out to try and reduce that. However, a couple of things have changed since that point when we said that. The macro conditions have changed considerably, and the overall capital markets have diminished considerably too, which obviously has had a natural impact on our share price. I'm not commenting on the share price and where it is now, where it should have been, and what it was, in the boom times. That's not the point of this conversation. The point is, at that point, we were expecting to raise capital at a much better share price, because the macroeconomics were very different, which meant we would be able to, yes, we've issued more shares than we wanted to, and we wanted to be at $1 billion. However, let's not miss the point that it's not the shares that we've given away, it's the value that we've added from that. So yes, there's 300 million shares or whatever out more than we would have expected. But from that, we've raised, $9.5 million worth of money, which we've turned, which we've bought significant amount of monies, and, we're now into the hundreds of millions of revenue. So, I certainly don't lose sleep at night thinking you guys haven't got good value for money. If every share that we give away, we're making sure that that's good value that's coming back into the business, that's going to allow us to grow and take us to the next step. We know it's painful. Believe me, I don't look at the share table every time I get a report of 1.3 billion. I hate it because I know how much difficult, heavy lifting it is to get that up. But I kind of just wanted to clarify that point. We are very, very conscious of it. We said we'd do $1 billion, and that's the reason why we haven't. It's not through our lack of management or inability to, conditions have changed. So moving on to the share buyback is something I can't really say much about right now. I don't want to confuse the market. It's not something that's really on our agenda right now. I know you guys would like to. If we got in $50 million of cash in tomorrow, I still wouldn't do a share buyback. I'd spend that money on investing in businesses and growing them, because we can turn this into a much, much bigger business than wasting the money short term. And you may not want to hear that right now, but I know longer term you'll thank me for that when we've got, we've got serious. We're too new, we're too infancy to do that. That's something that the more established companies do when you've got a lot of cash on your balance sheet that you can't put anywhere else. But it's not off the table for the future. I'm just saying it's not something, I don't want to confuse the market with it right now. And it's something obviously that people have been talking about a lot. However, the reason I'm saying it's not off the table is obviously we are working very hard with our investment bank for our uplisting plans, and inevitably that's going to take various different causes to reach where we need to be to qualify. The share lockup is something that has been promised and will be delivered on, and that will be very much as part of the uplist, as I think we've said to you before. But not only as part of the uplist, it needs to be done to get maximum value. There's no point in doing it, locking up shares when the market is at its lowest. Everybody's considering how bad is this recession going to be? Am I going to be able to pay my mortgage in June, July? Maybe I shouldn't lock up now. Let me wait and see what's going to happen. We don't want that type of situation. We want, when we put the offer out, it's going to be something that people are going to be able to be ready to take up, confident. So we need to be a little bit further ahead, and not quarters. I'm saying months ahead, and it needs to be aligned with our uplisting plans. So again, so just to answer you, it is going to happen. It's just a matter of the time. So I think that pretty much covers all those points, and we'll go into the questions and answers. Team, I think we've covered that pretty much throughout the day. We've got our core management team, which sits in the Dubai office, really, which is sort of, let's say, the central engine room. But every business, ultimately, we're building their own board out. If you think back to the uplisting plans, every business needs its own credible CEO who's an expert in his market, has the experience in his market, and is able to deliver the business plan that we want and shares our vision. So this eventually, as time will go on, there'll be more and more CEOs, as you've met, a bunch of the management team today, and more and more of these events, you'll meet more of the management team. There's sort of more layers coming under, but this is sort of the core engine room. So if we want to go into the Q&A, we'll whip through these, sort of just cover these points topic by topic, because these were sort of all emails. And as JP said, I think we had, 200 emails, probably 10, 15 questions on each. So we sort of just try to group them together. A lot of them were just, people just were too lazy to read the Form 10. They were answered in the Form 10, or they've been discussed and they're just too lazy to read it. But some of them where there was a common thread where obviously people didn't know the information, or we felt, there wasn't maybe enough information for them to do. We're sort of just gonna ring through that.
As I said, there was, well over 200 questions that came in. What we tried to do was just formulate the majority of the questions and put them here. There were a couple more which we had answered previously. So we spoke about Serbia, for example, previously. And We will take a couple of questions once we get through these, if there are any. But just quickly, so Vera Drones, that was one of the more prominent questions that came through, and I guess there's a bit of noise out there on that. So we announced that we had signed an agreement with Vera Drones just prior to our last shareholders meeting. We had a definitive agreement signed with the company, and we then went on to work with the company. We actually invested a small amount of money in getting some of their operations going, around $60,000. And in the course of working with them, we found several discrepancies in the business that could really only be found when you operating a company, right? Just things that should have been there that weren't going to be there. If you recall, we had forecasted that we would have drones manufactured, I think, around about the third quarter of last year. And what we realized in the course of working with Vera was that it was just not going to be possible. And if it was possible, it wasn't going to deliver what we wanted to do. Again, we continued to work with them. And I'll say at this point, we do actually have a new agreement, an MOU now signed with Vera Drones, but it's completely on our terms that they can manufacture some things for us when we wish to give them an order to manufacture something for us. What else happened in that period was Russia invaded Ukraine. And for various reasons, you can just look at the structure of Vera Drones, that was not going to be suitable for us going forward. So if you take, for example, the defense businesses, one of the acquisitions that Hyperion is looking at, the owner of that particular potential acquisition said to us, if you guys have anything going on with Russia, I do not want to be involved with you at all. Look, by that stage, we had far moved on from that relationship. We didn't know at the time of signing with Vera what was going to happen in Ukraine and things like that. So there's a lot of other factors that influenced our decision to just not move forward in that fashion. As I said, we have a definitive agreement. We could produce that at any point in time if need be. We've now signed an MOU with them, as I said, on our terms to move forward if we need to. But I think we did the right thing. I think it was certainly the right move. And in addition to that, because I know Nick will be very quick to add to, that drone industry, the gestation period to get to a certified drone, we're looking at a number of other potential acquisitions in the drone space. To get to that place where you've got drones carrying people is probably realistically 5 to 10 years at best. So we were looking at spending a hell of a lot of money without any return in the even the medium to long term point. Again, with all those other risks factored in. Do you want to add anything to that?
No.
Covers it. So hopefully that's covers Vera for you. As I said, we're still very keen on building firefighting and rescue drones. I think rescue drones are fairly far off in terms of that technology, in terms of transporting people in our view. But in terms of firefighting drones, there's capability that we're looking at the moment. And I think there is something that we're looking to bring in due course. So we had a LOI, a letter of intent signed. Let me just explain the question. A number of people asked that we had spoken about a battery company with 20 million in revenue we had signed a letter of intent with. So we had signed a letter of intent with a battery manufacturer, 20 million in revenue, more or less. Upon further investigation in the business in terms of when we actually visited their site, again, I mentioned the word discrepancies a lot, but this is what happens in these kind of deeper phases of due diligence. The way we work is we conduct additional due diligence. In the first phase, we'll look at their financials. We'll ask a number of questions. There's essentially a lot of documents that they need to provide us. In the second phase, we'll obviously visit their sites. Some cases we'll visit their sites in the first phase, of course, but in the instance of this acquisition, we then visited their site. We just found that, it just wasn't going to perform as well as we wanted to. So as Nick spoke about in that renewables sector earlier, there is an acquisition that we're looking at around about $20 million in revenue. I think that's a far more suitable for acquisition for us as a business to be making. And I think there's plenty that you don't know about where we've signed letters of intent and we've walked away from deals because you find several discrepancies in them. And I think our communication strategy certainly changed where we have a lot of deals where we're on the cusp of doing various things, that we obviously keep that until the right point in time for us to actually make that announcement. So you'll see that strategy certainly change, and you'll see that going forward for the rest of the year. In terms of change of focus from 2021, I think we covered that when, if you recall, I just spoke about who we are as a company in the introduction piece, and I spoke about us, transitioning from very much a public safety focused company to being, yes, very focused on public safety, of course, but adding to that the other subsidiaries, the renewables, the defense, and of course the industrial component, right? So that picture's changed. I think that's the reason that question came through. There was quite a common thread of that question coming through. I think there is in the US market, there's probably some questions or maybe some frustration from shareholders around us getting the firefighting technology into the US market. And obviously we've spoken about that being a key area of our focus in 2023. We have made some good progress selling into various markets globally. But of course, we understand that for you as shareholders in the US, that's very, very important to you going forward. And so obviously that's reflected in a lot of our focus this year. But we've really not changed our core focus. The passion is still very much there in that public safety aspect. That's why we've got the likes of Jason and Dan Peters here. And obviously, that there's huge plans for us going forward in that space. It's really just broadening. It's that conglomerate strategy that we've spoken about so many times that is really what you're seeing being fulfilled. And hopefully that picture, makes a lot of sense to you.
Yeah, I think that leads on to the question of timelines. Those of you that are in business or even plan something personal, it doesn't always go to exactly the timelines. And in business, we've got especially the deals that we're trying to do. We're trying to negotiate good value deals for the shareholders. And that means not overpaying. That means not putting too much cash down. So those negotiations can take as long as they take. And also part of that is you have to sometimes let the deals bleed out, because if you rush too quickly into the deal, you're not going to get the price you want. So we have to be ready to let, and that's ultimately for your guys' benefit. So screaming at us for a deal maybe taking a little bit longer, there's a reason for it. Believe me, we don't go to bed at night and go, we're so glad that hasn't happened today. Every day we eat, sleep, and dream and, believe in these deals. But also a lot of this stuff is, as we've covered in the earlier part of the presentation, I'd like to think we're not a typical OTC company. We're trying to build something much bigger. And therefore, it's not just about acquiring a company and putting it on a disclosure at the end of the quarter. These businesses need to be integrated into our management systems. They need to be integrated into our reporting. We need to have our own management team expecting that the moment the seller gets his check, he's going to lose interest. So we need to be ready with our own team to take over. So all these things take time, and sometimes we think we have it worked out, and the guy that was going to be the lead on it is now not available anymore. His wife died, whatever. All this type of stuff happens. It's this is the real life of a business. So at no time do we intentionally mislead anyone on the dates. We give our best information of when we think something is going to work it out, and that's been carefully calculated, carefully planned. And I don't think, bar one or two, maybe three, a couple of things out of probably the 100 that we've promised you, I don't think there's many that we've either not delivered yet or haven't been pretty close to the timescale. So obviously we need to consider the macroeconomic conditions, which obviously also have an impact. So what we stand today and say this might be a good idea, we don't know what's going to happen on Monday morning. Whether NATO is going to get involved in the Ukraine war, we don't know what the next call is. So and obviously that every decision that happens in the macroeconomics, we have to then look at our business and say, okay, what's that going to impact us? Is it a supply chain issue? Is there going to be a shortage of chips, which affects fire trucks, which means they're not going to buy nozzles? So we need to be one step ahead of the game. It's not just, it's not just a surface level, look at a business like it, look at the balance sheet, get the money and buy it. There's a lot more to it. So I think the timelines, in terms of what we've promised, I'm not embarrassed to say where we are. I can look in the mirror and think, we've done the best we can in terms of our timelines. Everything we say, will materialize. If it's taking a bit longer, it's still coming. In terms of the uplist, as I think I've had conversations with some of you throughout the day, obviously we would have liked to have uplist last year. That was sort of the plans we were working on. However, as we've used the same word again, the macroeconomic conditions changed considerably through the course of last year. I'm not hinting that we would have maybe been ready to do it, but that was certainly our plan. But obviously, as the year went on, there was more and more pushback on any businesses that were uplisting, and I now am actually glad to say that we didn't do it last year, because I think I'd be standing up here with you guys going, why was it such a flop? I don't think last year was the right time to do it from our side. And I think probably evidence proves that if you look at any of the OTC companies that went up last year, there's not many that are performing. In fact, I don't think I've seen any that are performing that were uplisted. So much so that the Nasdaq actually had more as a moratorium on uplists through the back half of last year, where they actually didn't want any more OTC companies going up. They kind of didn't want the OTC drag, just making Nasdaq another OTC market. So we obviously, on that basis, were on the right track of getting our own stall in order, getting our house nice and clean, getting everything organized, building revenue, building a management team. So I believe now we're entering the right phase, and we're sort of working heavily for that. And bear in mind, as we've said many times, it's not one uplist. There's multiple. Each subsidiary, as it gets to the right critical stage, and some of them are easier than others. For example, QIND is a very simple business. I know it looks complicated by what they make, but ultimately it's a very simple business. It's one business with serious revenue, very straightforward in terms of for a Nasdaq review for uplisting, with a real, a seriously impressive balance sheet, where some of the other businesses may take a while to consolidate them and get them into shape. So moving on for that, I think I've probably covered that under the consolidation of the acquisitions. We don't buy less than 51% of any business. Because we like to have the control. We like to have the management control. We always take the domineering position in terms of board seats. Although we like the companies we acquire to operate relatively autonomously because they know their particular area better than we do, we still like to be able to pull the strings if we need to. But also the 51% allows us to consolidate our revenues. And with our uplist plans, the revenues are really important. But also there's a deeper level regarding regulation. I'm obviously not a lawyer, but if we start acquiring too many companies below 51%, we then become an investment company, which we're not registered as now. We're now an operating company. So buying more than 51% puts us in an operational position. Annual dividends, I think as much as I'd like to say we're going to write you all a check at Christmas time, I think we all know this is a slightly longer term game. And I'd probably like to think that a lot of the real shareholders, i.e. all you guys in the room and our huge following we've got, there's 40,000 shareholders in the no-bo list. We were absolutely amazed. We were hoping we were going to be at 10 or 12,000. So when we came in at 40,000 and something,
42,000, yeah.
Seriously impressive. And I think that's a big thanks to all of you guys in this room for spreading the word and helping to share the story. And you guys in the Discord room, making the data available to everyone. So I think the majority of you guys as shareholders would probably far rather us not pay anything out this year or next year, but actually grow the balance sheet and grow the share price double or triple, or even considerably more. The dividends and locked up shares, I can't say much more about that. That is part of the whole part of the lockup plan.
Just, are we going to be looking to do more interviews with, various PR firms and the likes of Benzinga, influencers and things like that?
I think, our journey, and still today, we're very proud to say that our share price, our volume of share, it's all been organic. It's all been organic, and thanks to you guys is what I say. And I think that's a real credibility, because the majority of the OTC stocks are running with IR campaigns, and that's what's pumped their stock. Ours is a real genuine business, and I saw that on one of the questions about the share price. Management view of the share price. Sorry, I missed that question, but our view is if we build a proper business, the news is going to carry out there. Now, we definitely haven't been good enough at getting the story out, which I think is probably where that question is leading. We need to be much more active in that, and we've been hiring probably the last 6 months trying to find a chief communications officer and a PR person. So I promise you from today, you will, over the course of this year, start to see more and more activity in that space as we sort of start to find, the right people. But we're certainly trying to be a more professional company, stepping out of the OTC limelight of the way OTC companies work and moving more into sort of the big boards mentality, which is why you're probably not seeing as many tweets and as many, PRs that are perhaps not as detailed as guys would have liked. We're trying to move up that level. What will ERT look like in 2 years? I think we've probably covered that today, haven't we?
Yeah, it was quite a common question that came through. But I think we certainly have covered that. I know Dan painted a pretty good picture in terms of where he's looking to take it. And I think, just to add, going back to our focus as a company, it's still very core to who we are, very integral in terms of the public safety, life safety side of things. So for me personally, where I'd see it in 2 years is it making a huge difference in the US market. I think you would see in 2 years' time, you will see that innovative technology that we have, that brand is noticeable in the markets. Maybe not out there and advertise on billboards everywhere. I'm not talking about in that sense. But if you were to speak to, a local firehouse, they would at least know about it if they're not buying it yet in 2 years' time. But from a company perspective, globally, revenue-wise, I think we've put some of the numbers up, and I think for me, ERT will be a huge chunk of that. I wouldn't want to say that ERT would be $1 billion revenue company in 2 years. It certainly has the potential to be that. But I think it's going to be delivering quite substantially. So that's the reason it's a key area of focus for us in terms of manufacturing capability and vehicle capability here in the US. So you'll see that unfolding.
So I'll just come back to that management view of the share price, because I probably haven't answered that. And I don't actually think this question is for anyone in this room. I think it's more for the Discord room and some of the Twitter chat. So of course we care about the share price, of course. But if we got really upset about the share price every time we had a red day or 3 red days in a row, I think our whole board would be jumped out of a bridge by now. And I think every CEO on any public market would have done the same. So of course we don't like it. Of course it doesn't impress us. It makes my job significantly more difficult, because obviously when the share price is highly volatile or moving, on a downward spiral, it makes raising capital more difficult, which obviously the rest of the team, my real job is really in the capital markets of raising the capital. So of course I don't like it. So of course I care. But the bottom line is where we can control, and that's building a business for you. That's the part that we can control, because ultimately we know, and it can't be bullshitted, it can't be ignored. At the end of the day, the company valuation will eventually come through on the share price. And that may not be this afternoon, it may not be tomorrow, it may be next Christmas or the Christmas after. But eventually, when you've got $1 billion balance sheet with a seriously desirable, profitable company that's sitting on cash, generating cash, the share price is going to go to the right area. It doesn't matter what PR was put out, who said what Twitter groups were saying what. And that's the part that we can guarantee you, that every day we're building a proper business that is going to be desirable for everybody in this room and everybody in the world. So we don't have any control over the daily share prices. Again, this is not for you guys, it's the guys in the Discord room. And on the Twitter groups, we don't have any access on it, any control over the share price. We don't like to see it go down, especially when we've busted a gut for a deal, announced the deal, and you have a red day. Believe me, there's nothing more demoralizing as a team. But we've learned and we've trained ourselves, and it's something I tell the team every day. Don't take that type of news personally. Filter out the social media. We know what we're doing. We believe on what we're doing, and we know we're doing the right thing, and we're seeing that, and those results will come, and they'll speak for themselves. So yes, we care. To answer a simple answer, yes, we care, but we focus on the business. And while we're building a business, we know that's going to deliver for everybody in the long term. And where we can put in short-term strategies, to mitigate that risk, when we're getting, shorter tax or whatever the hell it might be, of course we are aware of it. And of course we're doing everything in our power. We're not being oblivious and saying, we don't care, it's not our problem, we're building a business. That's totally not our attitude. But what we are saying is, we're not going to let the tail wag the dog. We've got to be in control of the business, and we've just got to be acutely aware of what's going on, which I think we do. So when we see that there's a trend of why something's happening in the share price, if it's something that we're doing, we're aware of it. We try and make the changes. We try and perhaps it's sometimes like the Serbia story. It might be something with news. Somebody misunderstood something, or it's just somebody going after us, and we try and correct that in the markets as best we can. But we certainly don't let it distract our focus. So I think it's over to you guys for questions. We're going to try and limit this probably to let's say 5 to 10 questions max. Otherwise, last year we were here for 2 hours with question and answers.
With the QIND purchase, the tranches that are mentioned, where's the money going to come from for all of those? I think there's a $63 million requirement within a quarter or two.
Yeah, so it's coming from a couple of things. One thing is the company actually has relatively good cash flows on its own. So some of it will be funded out of its own cash. But we will obviously be doing, we've got 2 funders at the moment, term sheets on our desk from 2 funders to finance those tranches. And we're just massaging out the final terms of those. So that the funding is lined up, the funding is guaranteed from two particular parties, and we're really just working out the terms. But we're hoping by the time the second tranche is due, when we start to get to the bigger tranche, the company's profitability on their current orders, I think JP said there's like $150 million of orders currently in the books. A lot of those orders are starting to mature towards the second part. So we're hoping a big portion of that will be able to come out of their own cash flow. Next question.
Anything from the Discord, Rich? Jonathan first, yeah.
On the management team slide, top right, you had OTC QB listed on there. Is that still the goal, or are you looking for potentially another route?
Probably another route. Let's leave it like that. Rikus, over to you. Clock's ticking. 10, 9, 8.
This is for like the replay solutions.
Yep.
I know you speak about being like eco-friendly and all that kind of stuff. And I know by a little bit of research on that kind of stuff is there's a lot of chemicals involved, the stripping off the different elements to get what you want. I mean, is there any sort of plan that you have that kind of makes it more profitable or makes it more eco-friendly? Because I know a lot of the countries struggle with this, and it's a big industry coming in to find.
Yeah, I mean, it's that's a typical problem across most of the mining sector, full stop. But as I said a little bit earlier, that the urban mining sector is so new that the technologies are not really developed yet. A lot of the stuff we've developed our own technology. We've taken machinery that exists and mining machinery and adapted it to what we actually need. So right now, there's no real technology out there that is going to be better than anything else that exists. However, I would very much expect over the next 5 to 10 years, with the rate that market's growing, and again, this is sort of always our play, that we like to be at the forefront of the technology side. So once we're starting to get into scale, it's sort of something that we will definitely be doing R&D on. We have looked at a chemical out of Australia, but we haven't really got feedback on how good the results are yet. We're running some trials and some tests, which is way more environmentally friendly, but I can't comment yet if it's going to work or not. Cost-wise, it's actually cheaper as well. So, but we'll see how it works out. Profitability. Obviously, at the end of the day, it comes down to mineral prices. It comes down to the metal prices. Obviously, if we look at the macroeconomic conditions that we're looking at the moment, you would think that certainly for the next couple 2-3 years, we're probably going to be on an upward spiral on certainly on gold. I don't know. I'm not an economist. Maybe Warren can give us some more advice. We certainly we would expect to have the copper, purely the copper, run the entire business operation. Everything else is pure profit. And if you refer back, it is 240 grams of gold per 1 ton of cell phones. So we would expect the net EBITDA on that business to be well into the 20 and 30%. The real cost on what affects the profitability is how efficient and how slick we can be on the inward supply funnel. Now, one of the things we've been thinking of, and this is we're still, let's say, proof testing the concept with mathematics, is to run it on, certainly for the US market, to run it on some type of franchise model. So we would have 1 or 2 centralized major refineries, like seriously big setups. And then we would have little, let's say, so we would kind of like a hub and spoke system. So we'd have the 2 big refineries, and then we would have little collectors where we would supply them a little machine that could fit in their garage, for example, or on the back of their van. Maybe for 10, 15 grand soft loan that we might give them. And we would guarantee to buy all the supply from them. So they would actually have their own little business. We would give them, 50 kilogram sacks labeled, barcoded. So all they would do is they would go out around their little village and go and collect all the stuff, fill the bag, seal the bag, scan it on an app, and we would just send our trucks around continually collecting the stuff, bringing it into our refinery center. And the little machinery we would supply them would allow them to break it down, because I think this is part of the cost that people are struggling with, is obviously if you're transferring 1 ton of cell phones, it's a lot of space, but it doesn't need to be a lot of space, because actually we're going to crush it down anyway. And the crushing part is not difficult. I mean, you've all got a weed chipper or seen a weed chipper. It's literally something like that. It's not a big machine. So we supply them a little, something the size of their table. They drop all the stuff and crush it into a powder, fill the sack, and we collect the sacks and bring all the sacks in, and then go through the chemical process in our refinery. So we've got some ideas on how we think we can be more efficient than anything else in the market. But with these plants run, I mean, the plant that we've got will run up to 3 tons an hour. So, we've got to bring in serious supply. If you think there's about 8,000 cell phones in a ton. So we've got to bring in serious volume, but we're quite confident that we'll build that funnel over time. I feel like we're going to be here a while.
First, can you clarify the OTCQB? What's the direction with that? Are we still going there? They just didn't understand what's the plan.
Obviously, we've got to, the plan is to get to the big board. And as we've said, that depends on various different things at the parent company level, right? At the ILUS level. That depends on various different things, operationally and our own criteria internally to be able to meet the criteria. But secondly, also the macroeconomic conditions that we don't want to list at a time when the market may be on a slide. So if the list is sooner rather than later, there would be no real advantage to go through a QB stage. However, if it's sooner rather than later, then, sorry, a little bit more delayed for macroeconomic conditions, then we would update to QB first. But our intention is to try and avoid any extra layers that we need to.
Understood. Can you comment on a PR firm? Have you discussed possibly hiring a PR firm to assist?
We've actually tried 2, 3, maybe 4 PR firms. And what we actually found, and I'm not, perhaps the ones we've tried haven't been the right ones yet, but our business has so many different things going on at so many different levels. And what we found is that the agency PR approach hasn't worked for us because we've ended up giving them bullet points of what we wanted, or, this is the gist of the story. And when it's come back, we've ended up having to rewrite it all ourselves anyway, because then they're not getting the emotive part that's required in the OTC. I think if we're a film company and you're just, telling the world about some film or something, it's a different story. But the OTC is a very different trading place. It'll probably work for us at a Nasdaq level because it's much more factual, but in the OTC, it's much more emotive and, it's just the way it is. Literally we put out a PR that's great and everybody reads it the wrong way and suddenly everyone's complaining that, so until we can find somebody that's much more sensitive on being able to actually put out it in the right light of what we need, that's really the answer.
This goes back to the November interview with JP. You had mentioned 5 acquisitions that were ready to close at the right time in a specific order they had to happen, basically. And you did use the hyperbole, the storm is coming. Where do you kind of stand with those acquisitions that you hinted at in November? And do you feel like the storm hyperbole was met by today is kind of what the shareholders want to know?
Let me just put one comment in before JP speaks. Someone said to us, I think, what was the Serbia word that you used? That we said?
Astronomical.
Astronomical. Which obviously, if we look back to, I don't know, early part of summer last year, where that word was used, and you look to where we've got to now in a very short period of time, astronomical then was a deal of 20 million or 30 million. That's not astronomical for us anymore. Astronomical now would be a $200 million deal. We're growing up. We're not in the small, hopefully not in the small tank anymore. Anyway, I just thought I'd add that before JP talks.
Yeah, and I think by that definition, we've done an astronomical deal, but you're 100% right. And we actually mentioned astronomical, I think, in 2021. And, as Nick has said, that is still very much ongoing. With regards to the 5 acquisitions in November, we've done 2, right? Am I right? So QI and Al-Shola. As I said, we had something. The battery one we walked away from. We had the one that's come in, which will be announced in the next day or 2. Literally, we're here at this meeting, so we're focused on attending to you guys, and we'll come back, or we'll assess, and we'll put out the 8K and all of that on that one.
I think and then there's only one's dead. I think that's what you're trying to say.
Yeah, and there's plenty more that have come in. So we mentioned wildfire. If you recall back, and you'll have the recording, go back on the slide to where we had the various columns, the various deals. You'll see that there's a number there that are in the letter of intent stage, and there's a number that are in negotiation stage. That's far more than 5. So yeah, I'm quite. Whether that constitutes a storm for some, is debatable. I guess by many people's assessment, probably not. From our side, what did we accomplish as a business in 2022? Certainly a phenomenal amount. So we're incredibly proud of that, and I think we've also learned from the way we communicate. So that strategy since we've become fully reporting has had to change and all of that. But certainly there's a lot more on the cards even than what we mentioned back in November. So yeah, I'm more positive now than I was back then, but I can see it all from where I'm standing, right?
Understood. Can you give any update on the wearables and haptic suit that was previously discussed?
Yeah, we did quite a lot of work on that. Technology-wise, it's, let's say, 90% there. We're struggling to see the market penetration and the economic value from it. If you think about the amount of work, I mean, Dan mentioned earlier about the change in mentality of fire brigades or fire services. You know, you're changing hundreds of years of tradition of the way they operate. So yes, could the training be outstanding? Could it reduce their training cost? You know, would it be beneficial? Yes, 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 yes. The answer is yes everywhere. However, from our side, to be able to adapt the market to buy those would cost us a lot of money, sales reps running around, a lot of presentations, a lot of suits in the market. And at the end of the day, how many are they going to buy? The fire brigades are going to buy how many? 2 or 5? You know, so we kind of were struggling to see the economic value behind it, although we still see the value behind it. We just haven't really, I guess it's a little bit like an Uber story, that we know the model's there. We just don't know how to monetize it yet. The technology is, as I say, 80-90% there.
Thank you. On the ERT, I guess LinkedIn, I don't go there, but maybe other people do. There's an employee by the name of Jiri Uher. Does that name ring a bell? And is he still?
Yeah, I'll answer that one. So there's another company called ERT in Poland, I think it is. I'm not sure. For some reason, he's attached himself as an employee of our ERT business. And I don't know how to get rid of him from there unless I write to LinkedIn. But it's not, and I probably should do that, but it's not our company or our employee. So that's really that. ERT is registered here in the US, in Delaware, and we've spoken about the strategy with the SPV and things like that. So I think that clears it up.
Okay, I'll end it with this Discord question. Merchandise. I know we've been discussing merchandise for a long time, and there's some people that still would like to wear the ILUS gear. Can you comment on, you know, if that's something that you're still planning to do? Yeah.
Beautiful. High five.
Jordan has a bootleg version in front of him, and we don't want bootleg versions.
I think, yes, we need it. Yes, we'll do it. And now I'll put my hand up and say, I promise you for next shareholder meeting, we'll have proper merchandise. That's a promise from me. The only reason it hasn't been done, Rikus, is just purely through priorities of time. You know, the team are just absolutely flat out, and it's, do we put the team on sourcing tracksuits, or do we get them to get the catalogs made?
And also, Rich, just to add to that, we are looking to hire a PR manager and a new marketing director who will progress to become a CMO. Unfortunately, what we struggle with, you know, with the likes of millennials in that kind of creative zone, we need creative people who both understand the technical side of our business, but it's hard to get, you know, these creative people out of bed for less than like 120 grand a year, you know, and that's just for like a junior position. That's just to get them out of bed. Then to get them perform at a CMO level is not at a number any of our shareholders, I think, would be comfortable with in terms of a salary that we'd need to pay. And then I'm still having to write the PRs for that person because it's not good enough. Like, it's just not, like, Grammarly is literally better than half of these people. And that's what we're struggling with in that space, but it is important for us. Okay, maybe there's an app for that. But it is an area we're looking to push for. And obviously that person will handle merchandise, right? Because if merchandise comes from me, it's going to be like a vest for the gym, and that's it. You know, so, you know.
Oh yeah.
Nice. Hey guys, just quick question as ILUS gets more international. How do you, as management, how do you think about risk mitigation or risk advantage as it pertains to international currencies, right? Especially as, you know, doing business all over the world. How do you think about that? And do you do that at the parent company level? Do you leave that to the subs to handle based on where they are doing business?
How we do it from a financial point of view is we usually work on an averaged cost. So we kind of look at a historical exchange rate and we price everything based on that. And then we would calculate in at the end of the year or end of a quarter, the profit and loss on exchange. So let's just say, for example, the dollar to the pound was, I don't know, 124. We might price everything at like 120 in terms of our internal costings. And at the end of the quarter, if it had gone to 128, we would post, an 8-cent loss. If it had gone to one, so that's sort of how we do it from a financial point of view. It's something that's going to come onto Dan's desk quite heavily as we sort of expand the vehicle business. Is certainly, and with quality industrial, will become a much more bigger issue for us. I think more than the currency, it's been the materials costs fluctuation, which is really difficult for us to hedge against. If we were a wash of cash, you can buy forward, you can buy hedging facilities, but we haven't had that luxury yet. On the currency issue, we price almost everything in dollar. We buy almost everything in dollar. Even in Dubai, most of the international stuff is priced on dollar. So we haven't had to face that yet. Although I'm sure it's going to come. Our more concern, as I say, is the materials. But they seem to be going the right way in our favor at the moment. They seem to be coming down, not going up.
You mentioned earlier that market conditions might dictate on whether the parent ILUS goes to QB or skips over and goes right to Nasdaq. Does that also apply to QIND? Because
no,
on one of your slides, it says spin off in the first quarter. And if it doesn't apply, if you're thinking something different, how do we go 10x from where we're at now to get to that qualifying number to get into Nasdaq within the first quarter?
QIND will be uplisted sooner rather than later.
Just to clarify, it said H1, so first half of the year.
H1, not Q1.
And that's the plan, yeah. It could be sooner, but.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, it's just to come back on that, so probably missed the point. So QIND was QB. It was originally QB. Yeah, okay. So it was just for those of you who probably missed it on the PR, it was QB. And then when we announced the deal with QIND, with Quality International, OTC for some reason thought that we were going to be diluting the stock by a gazillion shares and therefore the control would change. So they kicked us off QB and said, until you've completed the deal and bring us the SPA to show us that you haven't issued another 400 million new shares and you guys are still in control. So which is obviously we've now going through that process, but we may just end up skipping that anyway because they're running parallelly.
I'm going to take that one. So actually another shareholder asked me that question earlier. We have been in discussions with departments that supply Tesla in the past, right? One of the reasons you'll notice we push this kitchen suppression system so hard, and arguably people would say, well, why kitchen suppression? Why aren't you focusing on battery suppression, for example? Because in your eyes, battery suppression must be a huge market, right? You go online, you see there's a Tesla on fire. But what you don't realize is Tesla's not being told that by insurance companies that they have to put a suppression system in their vehicle. So while the market is perceived to be there, from a monetary perspective, it's not really there. It's not like Tesla's crying out and say, guys, give me a solution to put this in my vehicle so that it doesn't catch fire. It's us telling them that they need it and they're going to need it. And at some point, the insurance companies are going to tell them you have to have a fire suppression system fitted to every electric vehicle, whether it's Tesla, Porsche, Taycan, or whatever they are. I don't drive electric, but you understand that from a market perspective, it's perceived to be there, but it's really not actually as big as people might think it is. There is a big market, though, in things like battery energy storage, fire suppression. That's a different area, and that's where we've been trying to push into. But the reason, coming back to the kitchen suppression system, there's a huge market in that space because it's driven by insurance standards. And Nick knows a huge amount about fire suppression. It's one of the reasons we got into this game. And so that's why we're pushing hard to get that done this year in this market with UL certifications, LPCB for the EN, the European markets, and for the Middle East, right? Because that market for us will then, once you have that product, it's not a huge change to it being ready for Tesla or for Porsche or for BMW or any of the other auto manufacturers. But I would argue that the bigger market actually exists in the battery energy storage units, because once there's a big fire there, I think the insurance agencies are going to say you need proper fire suppression that can actually extinguish these fires, not with 8 fire trucks turning up with 40,000 liters of water, however many gallons it is. You get the gist, I'd say.
But the closest to the vehicles where there is a regulation is buses, public transport buses, and obviously most of them are moving to electric, and there is regulation around that. They are required to have fire systems in. So that is something, and actually our system that will eventually be for buses, which we're not there yet, so I don't think we're going to have sales in the next quarter, is just a hybrid version of our kitchen system. I'm not sure. In theory, yes, but in practice, there's a whole lot of stuff behind that, because there's the installation, there's the maintenance. You know, who's going to actually get that thing serviced? I mean, probably most people don't even service their cars every year. So if you don't service a fire system and it doesn't work, is the insurance going to be liable that the system didn't work and your car burnt? You know, so I think there's a lot of deeper things to that. But in Europe and in the US, I'm not sure. It's something that Dan will pick up on through the course of this year. In Europe, there's quite a lot of lobbying going on, most of it coming out of Sweden. Sweden is, from Volvo, they were quite ahead of the game in terms of EV and hybrid vehicles. But as it stands, most of the pressure is actually between the fire brigade and the vehicle manufacturer, as opposed to somebody putting a fire system in. So really what they're really trying to tell the fire brigades is, if there's a fire, we need to be able to, the fire brigade, are telling the car manufacturers, we need to have better access to the batteries. We need to be able to get to it quicker, that type of stuff. It's not necessarily, fire brigades don't know how to deal with it. They're turning up with trucks and they can't extinguish it. It's just not enough water. It's lithium. It doesn't guard easily.
Yes, sir. If you look at ILUS's roadmap to the Nasdaq, I would love to hear you speak on your confidence in ILUS as a company to be able to continue to prioritize and manage acquiring new companies while at the same time ensuring the growth and the roadmap of the ones that you currently hold as well.
So I think we've covered that a little bit in the staff organization chart that we spoke of before. So we've got at the top level a core management team. So if we look even like, so for example, JP's role, if we go back, let's say 2 years ago, was very much in the operational companies, closing deals in the operational companies. And then gradually as the team is built up and we've brought people in, slowly the responsibilities we've actually been able to focus on as our management team, most of the team here at the higher level, which is in terms of, let's say, the capital markets, the public, the public side of it, the growth of the overall business. But in the subsidiaries below, as I've said before, we need to get individual, either general managers, managing directors, or CEOs, i.e. Dan has joined us, and we need to bring credible people like that into each division. It's Tim and Chris. So when we bring credible people into each division, they're very much responsible. They get a roadmap. They have a plan. They have to deliver that. And if you remember back, we spoke about implementation of our NetSuite ERP system and reporting structures. Our team above that shouldn't necessarily be working in the business. They should be working on the business. We've got to be looking at the KPIs. We've got to be looking at their reporting and ultimately changing management if it's not working, or changing strategy if we've got things wrong. We don't always get it right. But certainly from the core management team, from JP and our plan is really much focused about taking the bigger business up, where at the lower level, it's really much hands on the deck.
Great. So would you say that the current management of the companies that are currently held is still on track from everything that everybody was excited about with the expansion into the US with the ERT and things like that?
I'd say 50-50. So we've made some big progress, obviously, as we've said, with Dan joining. I mean, Dan comes with a significant amount of experience running an $800 million public company in our sector. So that obviously, brings that credibility to that particular side. So certainly I know JP and I sleep well at night knowing the US fire market is under safe hands with Dan, and we don't have to even give it a second thought. As we spoke earlier about the consolidation between BCD and Al-Shola, that's an area where we have got a problem. We've identified that and we're looking for the right people to do that. Part of that acquisition was strategical to allow us to use the Al-Shola team, which is stronger. So I think that there's no right answer to that. Some of the businesses, yes, they're in really great shape and the team are fantastic and you can run all the way. And the other ones, we've got big holes that we need to fill. The ILUS ones are complete and just going through the final bits of audit, maybe even finished today. Obviously, with the time difference. But the QI&D figures obviously play quite a big part in the ILUS balance sheet. And because of the consolidation and that acquisition happening a couple of weeks late, because we wanted to wrap it up before Christmas, but there were a couple of things that needed to happen. We're probably a week or two behind on that. So we would expect that audit to be finished in the next, say, 2 weeks to 3 weeks. And then at that point, then the full audit, the full filing will be done. No, that's 2022, the full year 2022.
Hey, Nick, I have a question about the investment bank. Do you guys have a name of the bank? And if you could also tell us about the relationship you have with them in relation to the other SPVs that you're trying to uplist?
Yeah, so we've engaged EF Hutton, who probably completed the most uplist deals on the Nasdaq in the last 2 years, who are working side by side with us, with the attorney Joseph Lukowski, who is also probably one of the most credible attorneys for uplists. So we've probably got the best team we could get on that.
What is the, or is there a plan for an easier rollout of the ILUS coin? And second, does not, because I'm not very savvy with cryptocurrency, is that once you're invested in the, or once you stake your ILUS coin to it, does that have like the equivalent to a stock trip where you would just reinvest the stake, or would that just go back into a money market account or reinvest in more coins?
You just get paid in coins, but just bear in mind the ILUS coin is not part of ILUS, right? So it has a royalty contract signed with Soto Capital that runs the coin, or a crypto company. So it's not part of our company. We just get a royalty back from it. But I would say that on that basis that the coin on its own has not been particularly successful. I think about it regularly on how we can make it more successful. I'm not a crypto expert by any means. Maybe there are some crypto experts in here. I have my own views on the whole crypto market in general. And I think we sort of probably found out the hard way over the last 6 months. In my opinion, I think we're still going to find out some more in the next 6 months. I think what really has come out, and again, I'm not a crypto expert and I'm not an economist. So this is not qualified, educated conversation. This is my personal opinion. So please don't take this with too much credibility. I think a lot of the crypto market, the real trading volume isn't what we perceive it to be. I think there's been a lot of wash trading where the exchanges were using bots to trade between themselves to create a perceived volume, but actually the real volume is not there. And then I think the secondary part of that, where the let's say less functional utility coins that really took off, I have my own opinions that there's sort of underlying money movement that needed to go on there, and that's sort of what pumped the coins. Because in theory, if you looked at the the ILUS coin, I don't know, maybe 200,000 coins sold or something, it was bugger all basically. But the logic behind it is we've got 40,000 shareholders who, a lot of them buy into the concept of what it does. So you would think that it should have, there should have been a little bit more activity. If you compared that to the other coins who are totally shite, they got absolutely nothing going for them. So in the theory that those were moving and ours didn't, it just raises questions to me as how are those other ones really, really moving? Maybe, maybe they did more marketing, maybe they had better market makers, I don't know. But it's certainly not something that coin, we definitely won't let it die. By any means, because of the importance of our shareholders. Most of our shareholders, I think probably have got, or not most, but most of the people that do own coins are shareholders, put it that way. And the value behind the coin still makes sense. But I think there's going to be a lot of regulation around registering of coins. I think you've probably read about some of the cases recently. There was certainly a massive one in Dubai where the guy was actually, it's a major coin, I'm not going to use the name, but it's a major coin. It was a top 20 coin. And he was actually prosecuted for what they called it as a Ponzi. Again, this is not like educated experience. This is just my own personal opinion, because the theory was that if you're staking a coin and getting paid out of a staked coin, you're really just relying on the next person to pay for that coin, which is really a Ponzi. It's a digital Ponzi. So, but obviously, technically it's not yet, but I think there's going to be a lot of regulation coming in. I think all coins are going to end up having to register properly, not just call themselves a utility coin, because the theory behind it being if there's a utility, are you really using the utility? No, the coin has a utility, but you're not buying it for the utility, you're buying it for the profit. So I think, so to answer your simple question, the coin isn't inside ILUS. It's not part of ILUS. We just get a royalty from it. It wasn't particularly successful, but we won't let it die. And they are still working on a plan on how to do more with it. And it hopefully will be reinvented at some point this year. But once there's clarity on what regulation needs to be done for it, because we can't avoid any damage to our reputation.
One of the things I like so much about ILUS is your ability to pivot and not be pigeonholed into just one company. With the unforeseen delays in manufacturing in Serbia, and then of course like Triple P falling through, but then you guys got QIND. Do you see yourselves having to pivot again and potentially have a stopgap company or somebody else for that manufacturing, or do we just have to wait for everything to get squared away in Serbia and the plan is just to continue on, but there is going to be that roadblock of the delay?
Yeah, so Serbia, I think I used the the word pivot earlier, and people got a little bit scared about that word in the way that they assumed potentially we're having to change course because Serbia is not happening. Serbia will happen when it happens. It's government, as Nick said, and if they work like we would, have been in there probably 6 months ago already. But unfortunately, there's certain areas we just can't change. But that being said, there is already acquisitions, regardless of whether Serbia and its timelines were working according to plan or not. There's already acquisitions in negotiation on the vehicle front. Dan touched on some of that on the manufacturing front that we're looking to push forward anyway. So if we acquire a large company in the US with, a huge amount of manufacturing facilities available, it makes sense for us to take space in that facility and assemble our electric vehicles there in the same way as we do back in the UAE, right? So yes, that could be constituted as pivoting potentially, but those plans are unraveling as fast as they unravel from a deal closing point of view. So we have other options in terms of manufacturing. And ultimately, what I'm sitting with from an eRaptor point of view is lead times, which are too high for most potential customers to bear. As I told some of the shareholders, guys want to buy eRaptors from us. We told them 16 to 18 weeks delivery. They said, well, I can just go up the road and get a Polaris. It's not electric, but I can at least put my stuff on the back of it and get going. 16 weeks for me is not acceptable. So that is a problem which has affected our revenue. And, so if the doors don't open in Serbia pretty soon, we'll obviously then look at the other options, which will be available pretty soon too, from a manufacturing point of view.
I think we're also not limited to Serbia. Our deal and relationship is with Serbia. The offer was from Serbia. However, we're becoming a global player. So most governments will entertain conversations with us with similar deals to what Serbia have offered us. But obviously, we've got a signed letter of intent with Serbia, and we committed to them. And strategically, it makes really good sense to us because of its location, because of its relatively, let's say, open-mindedness for politics. It doesn't really support any one side. But you've still got the protection. But if we had to, there would be no shortage of countries wanting to do similar offers for us.
Thank you.
All right, guys, thank you very much. And I just want to thank Anna-Marie for all her effort putting this together. And thank my whole team for the hard work that they do. You guys really put in the hours and the sweat. And I think from behalf of me and all the shareholders, I really want to thank the team, those present today and those back in the office and at the grindstone. And especially JP for your continual travel. I think most airlines have seen more of you than your own wife. True, yeah. But anyway, the team are committed. We're committed to you, and I just thank you for being committed to us. And those of you that made such a big effort to get here today, thank you very much. There'll be some drinks and cocktails and stuff out on. Anna-Marie, where is it going to be? Okay, downstairs by the beach somewhere. I'm sure we'll work it out. There's going to be some drinks and canopies and whatever. So let's just mingle and enjoy yourselves. And thank you very much. And we look forward to next year's one. Yeah. And thank you for your support.
So guys, just so you just quickly, for the drinks is actually scheduled to start at 6 p.m. right? So I think we'll be around to chat and answer individual questions, I guess, and things like that. But it's quite a bit of time until that starts. So we'll see if we can speed that up. But I'll be around. Some guys might want to go and freshen up and do what you need to do before the drinks. For those that want to really kind of go into the evening, I'm sure we can. But 6 p.m. it is at the moment, unless we come and tell you differently. Thanks.